Welcome, everyone, and thank you for standing by. I would like to advise you that today's call is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. All participants will be in listen-only mode until the public comment sessions of today's call. I would now like to turn the conference over to Tommy Wright. Thank you. You may begin.
Tommy Wright. Good morning, everyone, committee members, staff, colleagues from the Census Bureau, and welcome back to the 2021 Census Bureau Scientific Advisory Committee Fall Virtual Meeting. I should also mention our virtual audience is welcome as well. It's time to play the longest-running advisory committee game throughout all federal government. In fact, probably throughout the entire world. It's called Who Said That? We've actually had someone ask already this morning, are we going to play this? I will give a near quote from yesterday's meeting, and if you know the answer as to who said that, just blurt out the answer. No losers, no winners, just something to review the previous day. I recall that someone questioned the ordering of the comments, so let's see how this goes. Increased use of administrative data allows us to know more about the non-respondents because the Census Bureau knows where the non-respondents live. I wondered if many of the challenges to business respondents tended to be associated with small businesses. Who said that? I can't hear. I need to hear the committee. Can the lines be open for the committee? Operator?
All lines are open for the committee.
Yeah, the committee's lines are open.
Okay. Who said that?
I think John Checker said that.
Yes. Next, there is a 30-plus year literature on adjusting weights in survey sampling called calibration, which seems to overlap with the weighting that Jonathan Rothbaum mentions. Who said that?
Jay Bright said that.
Jay Bright.
Yes. I wondered about accuracy at the smallest levels, for example, the tract for ACS 5-year estimates.
I think I said that. That's Lance Waller.
Yes, Lance, you did say that. Next, you made a mistake in not asking any questions of the committee. Were there any goals, targets that were not met?
Mario,
that's correct. No single number can definitively quantify the quality of the census. Overall, the metrics suggest that the quality of the 2020 census is on par with the 2010 census.
I believe that would have been Michael Bentley.
Yes, that is correct. Apportionment data were delivered to the President on April 26, 2021, and redistricting data have been released. Our FY 2022 budget, as requested, is sufficient to maintain our work at our planned level.
That was Nick Rossini.
Yes. If you had to do the 2020 census over again with the same conditions and given the now known metrics, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I think that was me here, Mario.
Yes. And actually, this first person has been quoted in the news media this morning. Yes, I'll work with group quarters, but it's too early to state specifics.
Oh, that was Al Fontenot?
That's correct. How do you sort out pandemic challenges from the normal census challenges?
John Checker?
I think it was me, Barbara.
Barbara. Yes, Barbara. That's a good question, and I don't have an answer for that now.
Al Fontenot again.
That is correct. We have asked the authors of all assessments to make an attempt to address this very point.
Come on.
Yeah, you're going to have to repeat that one.
we have asked the authors of all assessments to make an attempt to address this very point of sorting out things. Pandemic from normal census process.
Al Fontenot again?
Related to Al. Well, no, not Al.
Darn.
Connected to Al, though.
Well, it must have been Mike Bentley or Nick Orsini.
Jennifer Reichert.
Oh.
Differential privacy is at the top of our list of interests. We look forward to hearing more.
Jay.
That is correct. Jobs frames, geospatial frame, business frame, and demographic frame. We want to develop and link these.
Michael Ratcliffe.
Yes. For the frames program, there is need to worry about the use of administrative records and the public perception. This includes third-party administrative records, for example, credit records.
Was that Chris?
No.
I believe that was me, Bill Clark.
That's correct, Bill. Yes. Is emerging demographic frame a national registry?
I think that was me again, Bill Clark.
Might be. Might have been shared. Okay, I had John Chika down for this.
Oh, okay.
But you're correct, Bill. It might have been you as well. But well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Did anyone score perfect? Score. Okay. Well, a gold star to anyone who came close to a perfect score. Now, on with the agenda. Members from the public will have an opportunity to comment today at 1:45 p.m. during the public comment period. During that time, we welcome members from the public to provide their public comments verbally. If anyone wants to give public comment this afternoon, please be mindful that comments are limited to 2 minutes. Anything over that may be submitted in writing for the record. If you are unable to provide your public comment today during the 20-minute public comment period, please send your public comment in writing. The Federal Register notice located on the committee's website provides more information on submitting written comments. You will also find information regarding closed captioning services on the website. I want to also at this point, rather than towards the end of the meeting, thank the people who've worked hard to make this meeting possible in the background, beyond the presenters and beyond the members of the committee. And that includes Shauna, Helen, Tony, and Kim. And I also want to thank the technical crew for their work in pulling all of this together and being in the background directing us throughout it. But thank you very much. A few housekeeping things. Committee members, we ask that you keep your lines muted during this call unless you are called upon to speak. To help facilitate discussion, members' lines will be kept open to allow more efficient discussion, so we must keep background noise to a minimum. Please note the video function is available during this session. We encourage the use while presenting and during discussion. Committee members, if you would like to comment, please, as yesterday, click the raise hand icon found on the lower right-hand corner. Jay, the committee chair, will see your virtual hand raised and will call on you in turn. Because this meeting is being recorded for transcripts, we ask that you clearly state your name before speaking for the record, so speak clearly each time. Jay will also be responsible for facilitating the discussion part of the session. First on today's agenda, our committee will hear Jay Bright following me. I hope I haven't taken too much time, Jay. Will provide opening remarks. Following Jay, Jason Devine and Cynthia Hollingsworth will present on the status update 2020 census data products and stakeholder engagement plans, followed by a discussion by Rochelle Winkler and committee discussion. We'll take a 10-minute break. After the break, Matthew Freites will present on the count question resolution, followed by discussion Kristen Moore and committee discussion. After that, James Burton and Belinda Metcalf will present on the annual integrated economic survey, followed by discussion Lance Waller and committee discussion as well. After that presentation, we will then have the public comment period. Following the public comment period, we will take another 10-minute break. During this time, we will suspend the meeting until 4:30, similar to what we did yesterday, for the committee discussion and formulation of recommendations. The WebEx platform and conference bridge, however, today will remain open during this time, but committee deliberations will be conducted offline. At 4:30, we will reconvene for the presentation of the 2021 CSAC Fall Virtual Meeting recommendations until we end at 5 p.m. I would like to remind members to raise their hand if you want to speak and also to mention your name. As a reminder to the public, during the question and answer sessions occurring today, only committee members are permitted to ask questions or make comments. Now let's please welcome Jay, who will offer opening comments. Jay?
Thank you very much, Tommy. This is Jay Bright, Chair of CSAC. Thanks to everyone for a great meeting yesterday. Thanks to the Bureau for their transparency and clarity and for helping to keep to the schedule while allowing time for discussion. I want to echo Tommy's thanks to Shauna, Helen, Tony, Kim, and all the rest of the technical staff for running a really efficient meeting behind the scenes. CSAC members worked very hard last night. We'll be pushing to finalize recommendations for our presentation later today. It's an honor to work with this group of experts on problems that are so wide-reaching and important. So we'll just briefly introduce ourselves before launching into today's agenda. I'm Jay Bright, Professor of Statistics at Colorado State University, mathematical statistician with particular interest in complex surveys, and I'm calling in from Fort Collins, Colorado. Deborah?
Hi, I'm Deborah Balk. I'm calling in from New York, Greater Metro New York area. I'm at the director of the CUNY Institute for Demographic Research and a professor at the Mark School of Public International Affairs. I'm a longtime international census data user. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Deborah. Tom Brunell?
Good morning. This is Tom Brunell. I'm a professor of political science at the University of Texas at Dallas. I study American elections and representation, and I'm calling from Richardson, Texas.
Thanks, Tom. Bill Clark?
Good morning, everyone. This is Bill Clark. I'm a political scientist and Associate Dean of the Graduate School at Penn State University, and I am calling in from State College, PA.
Thanks, Bill. John Chaika?
Good morning. I'm John Chaika. I'm a retired senior fellow from Mathematica, and I specialize in administrative records and survey data quality, and I'm calling in from Bethesda, Maryland.
Thanks, John. Barbara Entwistle?
Hi, this is Barbara Entwistle. I'm a sociologist calling in from Chapel Hill. My appointment's at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm interested in social contexts of health and demographic behavior. My involvement with census is a current project linking electronic health records with census data. Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara. Lester Mackey?
Hello, this is Lester Mackey. I'm calling in from Arlington, Massachusetts. I'm a machine learning researcher at Microsoft Research and an adjunct professor of statistics at Stanford University.
Thanks, Lester. Mario Marazzi?
Mario Marazzi. Hi, yes, I'm an economist, and I'm also former executive director of the Puerto Rico Institute of Statistics. I'm a longtime advocate of official statistics and transparency, and I'm happy to be calling in from sunny San Juan this morning.
Thanks, Mario. Jessica McKellar?
I would also love to be calling in from sunny San Juan. I'm in San Francisco, which is lovely, actually. I am a computer scientist by training and am a tech executive, and I'm very passionate about small businesses and enabling small businesses.
Great, thanks, Jessica. Kristen Moore?
Good morning. Kristen Moore, social psychologist and senior scholar at Child Trends. I do work on children and youth and young adults, and live in Washington, D.C., which is also sunny.
Great, thanks. And Kunal Talwar?
Hi, I'm Kunal Talwar. I'm calling in from the San Francisco Bay Area. Here I am a research scientist at Apple and work in privacy and machine learning.
Thanks, Kunal. Lance Waller?
I'm Lance Waller. I'm calling in from Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm a professor of biostatistics and bioinformatics in the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. My areas of expertise are statistics, spatial statistics, and geographic information systems. Thanks.
Thanks, Lance. And Rochelle Winkler.
Good morning, everyone. I'm calling in from Houghton, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula here at Michigan Technological University, where I'm a professor of sociology and demography with specialties in rural areas and spatial statistics.
Great. Thanks, Rochelle. And thanks, everyone. And with that, I will turn it back over to Tommy.
Tommy Wright. Thank you very much for that, Jay, and thanks for that second day roll call. It's very effective. Now we will hear from Jason Devine and Cynthia Hollingsworth, who will present on the status update 2020 census data products and stakeholder engagement plans. There will be a discussant, Rochelle Winkler, and there will be time for a committee discussion. Jason and Cynthia.
All right, thank you, Tommy. I think I'm going to control the slides, so if somebody could give me the ability to share my presentation for this session. Thank you. And I'm going to do this just because we're going to switch midway through to be able to give you a walkthrough of the 2020 data products planning crosswalk. All right, so we should be good with the presentation. Can somebody confirm for me when you can see it?
Well, good, Jason. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So good morning. I'm Jason Devine. I work in the Population Division. My colleague, Cynthia Davis Hollingworth from the Decennial Census Management Division, and I are going to provide a status update today on the 2020 census data products and stakeholder engagement plans. And included in that will be a short walkthrough of the 2020 data products planning crosswalk that is currently available online. So I'm going to start with a little background information. The 2020 census apportionment and redistricting data have been released. The timeline for the development and release of the demographic and housing characteristics file, or the DHC, was impacted by splitting the development work on the disclosure avoidance system to support the redistricting data from the disclosure avoidance system for the DHC. The timelines for the DHC and the detailed DHC are going to include both making decisions about demographic and geographic detail and the development and tuning of the disclosure avoidance system. Use cases and data accuracy will be considered in decisions about the demographic and geographic detail included in the DHC and detailed DHC. And consistency between the redistricting and DHC data continues to be included in the design of the disclosure avoidance system to support those products. And even though both approaches will be based on differential privacy, the DHC and detailed DHC will be protected using two different sets of algorithms. 2020 Census Data Products Planning Crosswalk provides information on the tables currently planned for inclusion in the DHC and detailed DHC, and I will show you that a little later. So just for clarity, we're going to discuss three products today, focus on three products: the demographic profile, the demographic and housing characteristics file, or the DHC, and the detailed demographic and housing characteristics file, or the detailed DHC. So as our work progresses on finalizing the content of the DHC and detailed DHC, there are some things that have to take place. We plan to revisit the demographic and housing characteristic and detailed DHC use cases. And we also need to consider the accuracy of the protected redistricting data, which has already been released. And we will be evaluating the privacy accuracy trade-off during the tuning of the disclosure avoidance system for the DHC data. And as well, we will be evaluating the privacy accuracy trade-off of the protected detailed DHC data. There are some potential changes we want to bring to your attention today. First, we've been considering limiting the Dhc tables to census tracts and above. The idea is that if we don't have to produce some of these tables at the block and block group level, we'll be able to obtain more accurate data at the census tract level while still protecting privacy. We're also considering producing the protected DHC tables directly without producing the underlying protected microdata. And I'll mention here the design of the detailed DHC already does not include the production of microdata. And we want to revisit the timing of the release of the demographic profile relative to the DHC and the contents of the demographic profile as well. And that will make a little more sense later. Now, I mentioned this idea of producing the tables directly without producing the underlying microdata. We see there as being some pros and cons for this, but we'd also like to get input on other potential pros or cons. Some of these include potentially increased accuracy in the DHC tables. So if we don't have to produce and protect all of the underlying data that's necessary when we produce the microdata and protect that microdata, we think we'll be able to achieve increased accuracy in the DHC tables. It may allow for the release of the DHC data sooner. Something to note, though, is any demonstration products released for the DHC would be in the form of tables instead of privacy-protected microdata files. So any of you that were involved with us or followed along with us on our work for the disclosure avoidance system that protected the PL product, we released a series of demonstration products that included privacy-protected microdata files, which had records for individuals and housing units that could be tabulated to produce tables so people could see tables they were interested in and the accuracy that was achieved. If we produced the tables directly, of course, the demonstration products would only include those tables. And there potentially is less consistency within the DHC tables themselves and potentially less consistency between the redistricting data and the DHC tables. The idea is that if we don't have a microdata requirement, we don't produce the microdata that would then be tabulated to produce these files, it may be more difficult to maintain consistency between and within these products. And it also may impact the availability of the DHC data in other products, such as a PUMS file and special tabulation. So because we wouldn't be producing the underlying microdata to support the tables in the DHC, if a special tabulation request was made and it required tabulating those microdata, they, of course, wouldn't be available or protected, so we'd have to go back to an earlier unprotected census file, produce that special tabulation, and then apply protections to that file. All right, so I've talked a little bit about the different files and some of the things that are being considered for the DHC. Now I'm going to go through quickly a description of each of these files so you have a better idea of what we're talking about when we talk about each of these files, and then this will make even more sense and you'll get even more information when I show you the 2020 Data Products Planning Crosswalk. So the redistricting file, which of course has already been released, includes data that's used by 50 states for redistricting. And this product was the first file that included demographic and housing characteristics at detailed geographic levels or at the census block level. And subjects included, they were somewhat limited for this product because they only meet the redistricting requirements or needs. Subjects included the voting age population, that's years 18 and over and under 18, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, occupancy status, and group quarters population by major GQ type. And again, these tables were all available at the census block level, and the initial release was on August 12th, and then more recently, the data was released again in an easier-to-use format. Which brings us to the demographic profile. So this product has not been released yet, and it will provide critical demographic and housing characteristics for local communities. But the key here, they're from selected DHC tables, and it's done in a more streamlined, easy-to-use format. And the idea has always been that we would release demographic profiles as shortly after the release of the redistricting data as possible. This would give data users a subset of tables that would be eventually available in the DHC, or as in 2010, the SF1 file, but they were made available sooner. We're dealing with a little different timeline this decade. Rather than these data being released a few months after the release of the PL product, we're now looking at a longer time frame, and we're wondering if it makes sense to continue to produce these tables and to release them, what would be just a short time before the release of the full DHC, when we could focus our efforts on the more extensive set of tables in the full DHC and release them all at the same time. However, we currently are proposing to produce a demographic profile, and the subjects that are proposed for inclusion are 5-year age groups, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, relationship to householder, the group quarters population, housing occupancy, and housing tenure. And the 5-year age groups and the household and relationship data would be new and were not available in the PL product. And the proposed lowest level of geography for the demographic profile would be the place and minor civil division level, and then geographic levels above that level. Okay, so this brings us to the demographic and housing characteristics file, or the DHC, and I view the DHC as kind of the main data product with demographic and housing tables from the census, and it follows the tables that were provided in Summary File 1 in 2010 with some exceptions. And subjects would include age, sex, race, Hispanic or Latino origin, household type, family type, relationship to householder. And then here with the DHC, some of these topics are repeated for major race and ethnicity groups, tables for the group quarters population, housing occupancy, and housing tenure. And these tables are proposed to be available at various geographic levels, with many proposed to be available at the block level. So the DHC will not include tables that provide counts by detailed race, Hispanic origin tribes, and population counts by household family types. These are the tables that we've mentioned previously that require a household person join, and some of these tables are planned to be included in the detailed DHC. And the detailed DHC will include detailed demographic and housing characteristics for statistics for detailed race and ethnicity groups, and American Indian, Alaska Native tribe, and village populations, as well as those tables that require person and household joins that were not included in the DHC. All right, so this next slide is a screenshot of our webpage that provides information for the 2020 Census Data Products Disclosure Avoidance Modernization effort. And I think we've really done a great job putting a lot of material out there so people can read up and see where we're at in this process. And the box I want to draw your attention to is the Get Engaged with the next phase of 2020 Census Data Product Development. And this, even though it's very small in this slide, is where you would be able to find online the 2020 Census Data Planning Crosswalk. So I'm going to exit out of this presentation now, stop sharing, and then I'm going to share again, but now I'm going to open the 2020 Planning Crosswalk. All right, can you see the crosswalk? I will assume you can, and I'll just start talking about it. So this is a fairly extensive file. There's a lot of information in this file. There are a number of tabs, as you can see. Fairly complicated, but there's a lot of good information here, and it provides a crosswalk of the tables that were available in 2010 and what we're proposing for 2020, and allows you to look and see in detail what's being planned for the products for 2020. I'll draw your attention to the top. We have a little bit of a little paragraph up here that provides some important information, and there's a line that's provided in red that says table content and lowest level of geography may change based on analysis of data quality and the privacy accuracy trade-off. And that's true. And as I mentioned, those are things that are being considered as we go forward with the work for the DHC, which the timeline for that, Cynthia will talk about in a little bit. This Readme section just gives a little bit of clues about how you can work with this file. As you can see, it shows sort of our coding scheme that we use to help you see what level of geography different tables are available at. It also shows the race categories that the tables, when they're repeated by different race categories, by which they will be repeated. Then if you look across the bottom, there's a series of tabs for the different data products, the ones I just went through. As you can see, there's a tab here for the PL crosswalk and the PL tables. So the PL crosswalk, that initial tab, lists the tables, so you can see the tables that are included in that product, and provides information about the lowest level of geography and whether it was available in 2010. And then the next tab for each product gives more details about what's available in those tables. So you can look up a particular table, like say P1, for example, and then you can look at the next tab and see exactly what is proposed for inclusion in that table. The Vhc Crosswalk follows the same pattern. You can see here now we're looking at a more extensive set of tables. But again, these are all just tables that are also going to be available in the Dhc Crosswalk. And you can see it goes into more detail. Again, you can see what ages those tables, data will be provided for in those tables. And then that brings us to the Vhc Crosswalk. And now it's much more extensive. And I'll scroll down just to show you how many tables are provided here. And as you get down to the bottom, you start seeing some tables where they were available in 2010, but they're not going to be provided in the Dhc in 2020. And some of these tables are included in the detailed Dhc, which is noted over here in one of these other columns. And you can use this drop-down tab to sort through these columns to help you navigate through this file more easily. But I'm going to take you back to the top because I'm just going to walk through kind of a scenario. Somebody might be interested, say, in looking at the Dhc to see what's going to be available at what level of geography for sex by age. So if you scroll down, you see the table here, sex by age for selected age categories. So you might see that table and think that's great. It's going to be available at the block level, but I'm really interested in single year of age. That would bring you down if you went down a little bit further. You'd have to scroll through all the different iterations by different race groups for that table. So P12, sex by age, is also available for all the different race groups. If you scroll down and get through the iterations, you get down to table P14, and you'd see that table P14 is sex by age for the population under 20 years, and this now is a single year of age table available at the block level for these age groups. And details about this are available. If you go to the next tab, you can look and see. So this, for example, now shows P12, exactly what age groups are provided in that file by male and female. So the details for all the tables are available there. And something that is new for the crosswalk, and I'll mention we updated the crosswalk. It was first made available almost 2 years ago, and it's really only been enhanced, and some tables have been added. So we really haven't gone through the process of kind of scaling back. Like we haven't removed any tables that are proposed to be available at the block level at this point, but that's something we're going to be reaching out to stakeholders to get assistance and input on as we go forward. But something also that's new for the crosswalk now is the detailed Dhc tables. So here this allows you to see the tables that are now proposed for inclusion in the detailed Dhc. And you can see these first set of tables, T1 through T3. These are the tables that were available in previously that were available for basic demographics and household type and characteristics. So these are tables that were, I think, available in Summary File 2 in 2010, but now they're being included in the detailed Dhc tables. And the key here with the detailed Dhc tables is they're essentially the same tables that would be available in the Dhc, but now they're being iterated by detailed race and Hispanic origin and detailed American Indian tribes and native village groups. And if you go down to this next section, these to be determined tables, these are the tables that require those person and household joins. They've now been moved to the detailed Dhc. And then you can go down and there's some additional tables that are provided that were available in SF2 in 2010, but now are not proposed for inclusion in the detailed Dhc. And again, as with the others, you can get into more details. It shows you exactly what's provided in these tables. So you can see that if you're more interested in the details of what's provided in those tables, that allows you to see that. All right, so that's my walkthrough of the detailed Dhc, and I'm going to stop sharing this and go back to the presentation because this is the point at which Cynthia is going to take over and tell you about our timeline and our stakeholder engagement plans. All right, Cynthia, if you're ready, go ahead and just let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Awesome. Okay, thanks, Jason. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and, again, talk about the importance of the stakeholder engagement. That's both internal and external. as well as map out our current engagement plan for finalizing the DHC. So the process of producing the redistricting data over this past year has been really informative. It highlighted how critical stakeholder and data user engagement is to the process. Specifically, there are two major lessons learned from the process that we discovered. One, successful engagement requires both teaching and learning. We've been educating the data user community every step of the way about how differential privacy, about what differential privacy is, why we've adopted it, and how the implementation of the top-down algorithm that Jason mentioned actually works. But in order to successfully implement the TDA, we also had to educate ourselves about how the data are being used and for what purposes. And that involved us interacting with the stakeholder and data user community to gather the critical feedback about their use cases. The second big lesson we learned was about the importance of producing and providing demonstration data along with the detailed summary metrics to allow for independent assessments of the data's fitness for use. Meaning we ran the 2010 census data through the 2020 DAS to produce statistics that were comparable to the published 2010 tabulations. And this provided a way for independent analyses about how effective the DAS's TDA was at preserving the data's usefulness for the various purposes. So moving forward, for the demographic and housing characteristics file, we plan to use a similar process. We'll continue our education efforts. We'll gather feedback from and listen to the data user and stakeholder community. And we'll also demonstrate how we might implement the DAS for these data. And with the first step is now the feedback process we're going through now, as Jason just talked about, on the crosswalk, where we're looking for feedback on the proposed tables, the characteristic detail, and their geographic level detail. And we're asking for that feedback by August 22nd. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we plan to continue our external engagements as well as internal engagements. But what you see here on the slide is a list of a lot of the channels that we've been going through and will continue to use as we gather feedback. This by far is not an exhaustive list, but it does highlight just a few, such as this group here, official consultations with the American Indian and Alaska Native tribal leaders, as well as our State Data Center and Census Information Center networks, and other federal partners. And we'd love to hear from others if you believe we are missing any key stakeholders and data user groups. Next slide, please. So now I want to pivot to, for the next two slides, to talk through the activities for the next year of how we get to completing the DHC development and moving into production. Now keep in mind, this is currently a notional timeline, so it should be used as a guide. Dates are not final, and they will be refined as we move through the process. Throughout, however, feedback from our internal and external data users, including yourselves, is going to be absolutely critical. So as shown at the very top, now through the fall, you'll see that as we just released the crosswalk last week, and over the next month, we'll be gathering feedback on the potential changes to the DHC. For example, as Jason mentioned, we talked about the possibility of dropping some block level or block group level tabulations in order to improve the accuracy for tract level tabulations. So this feedback is really important, and it's going to allow us to improve the configuration and testing of the DAS. As we confirm the important DHC use cases, that will move us into the next phase of developing some demonstration data this winter that we can then release to the public and the data user group data users for evaluation. I'd like to point out, as you'll see on this slide and the next slide, the feedback period where we will stop and reassess, determine the changes that are needed, and communicate that status to ensure we're keeping everyone updated about our plans. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the spring of next year, after we've received feedback, we want to produce the first set of demonstration data to be able to allow the data user community to assess fitness for use. And once we do that, once we collect that feedback, we'll continue tuning the algorithm and then produce a second set of demonstration data. With that second set of demonstration data, we will also plan on conducting a public workshop. This would be very similar to the December 2019 CNSTAT workshop, where this workshop will allow for internal and external data users to present their analyses and assessments of fitness for use of the data. This, again, is that critical feedback loop where it will allow us to move towards setting the final parameters for the DAS's top-down algorithm. That is, this feedback will help inform the Census Bureau's Data Stewardship Executive Policy Committee for when they make the final decisions about the privacy loss budget to be assigned for the production run of the demographic and housing characteristics file, as well as the demographic profile, and how that privacy loss budget should be allocated across the different components of the file. Then in the summer of next year, the actual production run of DHC will begin. And by begin, I mean with the DAS producing the privacy-protected microdata. If we will continue down the path of microdata, that would be used to tabulate the data products. I want to note, however, this date does not entail all of the activities that follow, which would be tabulating, reviewing, and disseminating the data products. So recognize that this timeline is not reflective of the actual data product release, whether it's the release of the DHC itself first or the demographic profile first, as Jason discussed. We're continuing to flesh out that part of the schedule. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide is just a graphical representation of the last two slides of the timeline that I just walked through. And I bring your attention to the bottom of the slide, at the bottom of this graph, where we highlight the DCEP decision points for assigning the privacy loss budgets for both the demonstration data, the two sets, as well as the production run. So with that, I believe this is the end of the presentation. We move into the questions for CSAC.
Great. Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn it over to Rochelle Winkler, who will be our CSAC discussant.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It looks like the slides I shared are coming up, and everyone can hear me okay? All right. Yes. Well, thank you so much to Cynthia and Jason for that really clear presentation and for bringing up these really interesting and important issues for discussion. I also want to commend the Census Bureau's commitment to data quality, stakeholder engagement, and transparency, all of which we've really seen evidenced in this presentation, and which I think are the basis of how decisions about these coming data products will be made. So, you know, we've gone to a new system of using differentially private disclosure avoidance systems, and that's one of the core challenges associated with preparing Census 2020 data products. And we see that challenge underlying the complications and adjustments that we just heard discussed. Immense resources and time went into preparing the redistricting data that were released on August 12th, and clearly there were a lot of important lessons that were learned in that process. Now that those data have been released, the Bureau is turning its attention to the what I see as the even more complex task of balancing privacy and accuracy in the demographic and housing characteristics files. You could advance the slide here. So the redistricting data that are already out there, I want to spend a minute. We didn't hear very much about that in the presentation, but I want to recognize that they have been released and they are being used now for various users, including redistricting, but also a lot of other uses as well. In that process, the Bureau set fairly high epsilon in order to meet the accuracy targets that were in place. And so that's kind of the reality that we're living within now. As we're getting users working with these data, we're hearing about some concerns, and I think especially questions about how accurate the data are for various uses, and unsure about how to interpret some of the data. And so just a few of those things that I've seen come up, you know, it looks like we have reliable race and ethnic group data for populations above about maybe 450-ish at the block group level. At the county level, like where are those? I guess what I'm bringing up is I think we really users could use a lot more guidance and communication from the Bureau about when these data are reliable and accurate, at what scales, and for what population subgroups. So that's something that we're seeing users struggle with some of those issues right now. And I really love seeing that I think the Bureau has clearly learned from the whole process of creating the redistricting data in rethinking the plan for working with the DHC data. So you can advance the slide, please. So with the DHC data, there are a lot more variables, and that adds exponential complexity. You know, we've heard people raise questions about, is differential privacy even viable for these data? You can advance, please. We see some of the attempts that the Bureau is trying to change the planners, things that they're considering in this presentation. So one of those things is potentially providing less granular data, not including some of those block or block group level data that we just heard about. The crosswalk that's out there, I think, is now a really useful tool so that users can see what the Bureau is thinking about and can use this tool to be able to see if the variables that they're interested in are available at what scales and start to engage and plan for how to do this. One of the things that I noticed is that some variables that were released down to the block level in 2010 may only be released down to the county level, or that's some of the things that I'm seeing start to be proposed in that. But a lot of those potential changes, my understanding, are not included in that crosswalk at this point. This crosswalk is not set in stone. It's very much up for discussion, and I hear the Bureau asking users for feedback on that. And one of the questions that I have is, you know, why the census tract, and is tract really the right geography to go down to? For instance, I think places and minor civil divisions are super important geographies because they are political units, and in some rural areas, tracts are sometimes bigger than those boundaries. And so yeah, I think that's an important consideration to make when we're thinking about what scale to release data at. You could advance the slide, please. This other potential change is the idea of not producing microdata to underline the Dhc tables. And I think this is really good that the Bureau is exploring this idea. I'm interested in hearing more about it. I think that we all need to learn a lot more about how this might work, and it sounds like the Bureau is still working on a lot of those things. So, you know, what are some of the improvements? How much more accuracy can we get without the microdata, and while still protecting privacy? So I think there are questions about that, like what are the trade-offs? What does it mean exactly that there may not be consistency across tables? I think that there needs to be some consistency, at least across some core variables. across tables, but at what point does that start to break down, and at what point is that okay? I think those are questions that we need to think about more. And then there's this other question about if microdata are not produced to underlie the tables, will they be available somehow? Potentially, like, will there be a PUMS file that's produced? Will that be a possibility? Will they be available through the research data centers? What about special tabulations that Jason and Cynthia mentioned? Special tabulations as a concern here. Is it possible to reserve some of the privacy loss budget so that tabulations could be created later? And I think as the Bureau starts to look at these questions, I would really encourage to reach out to organizations like IPPMS, who uses these microdata a lot and serves them to a much broader public and users, and also CNSTAT. Could advance the slide, please. The stakeholder engagement plan, I think I'm really glad to see a really clear plan and a lot of opportunities for engagement here. It sounds like the Bureau is planning on holding another public workshop similar to the National Academy of Sciences workshop sometime in the spring, potentially after the release of the first or maybe second demonstration products that would be released. You asked about whether 30 days is enough time for our users. I think probably not. There's so much complexity here and so much to review, but there's also so much tension between, giving more time and actually getting these data released at some point. So I recognize there's a lot of tension there. There are so many use cases out there, and we'll have some suggestions, I think, about some stakeholders that we might engage. Again, here, I think those data clearinghouses are really important stakeholders to engage with, because so many other people get their data from some of those common clearinghouses like IPPMS and Social Explorer, as just a couple of examples. And then there are a lot of researchers that have been publishing on the redistricting data demonstration products that the Bureau might reach out to engage those same researchers and potentially studying the DHC demonstration data as well. Advance the slide. And then finally, the timeline. I think I think most users are probably a little disheartened to hear that we won't be getting more data for another year, and we don't know exactly when more data would be released. But at the same time, it's really important to get it right, and there's some real tension there. And the importance to engage with users to determine that process. One of the questions that came up for me is, like, how will some of these users adapt to not having data ready as soon as they're used to hearing, and population estimates program came to mind. So those are some of the things that I'm thinking about. And in particular, I guess I'll just pose one question if Jason or Cynthia wants to respond. If you can tell us any more about the ideas for not producing microdata and what that process might look like, or how you're thinking of making that decision.
Well, thank you for those comments in the presentation, and I'll say a little bit about your question, but I think in your presentation there were a lot of questions embedded in there, and maybe we can come back and answer some of those, or maybe others will help us answer those. I found your first comment, though, sort of interesting in that it sort of suggested that we double back a little bit to the PL product and think about how we could communicate more about the accuracy of the PL product that was obtained, and that's now, I guess, a fact that we're all living with, because that data has been released. And the accuracy of those data at the block level will be a factor in the accuracy and the usability of data in the DHC at that level as well. So understanding that can help inform going forward. And I did sort of mention that in my one bullet, that's something that should be considered, is that that's accuracy that is going to carry forward. And we won't really, it's hard to know until we get into this sort of more of this time where we have demonstration data to be able to see. Like, I don't know how the accuracy for the total population at the block level is going to play out when we look at accuracy, say, for age distributions at the block level. We just won't know until we do demonstration data and can look at those results. But I think your questions all were kind of along the lines of the same things we're struggling with. And I think on it does show that we've at least done a reasonable job of communicating the challenges that are ahead of us. And I think those are all questions we'll be working through as we go forward and we'll have more clarity on. I will point out, I'll go back to the specific question you posed about not producing the microdata. And I'll mention that, as it was mentioned in the presentation, the detailed DHC already sort of goes down that path and that it produces the tables directly without the microdata. So we're already in that scenario for that one product. I may leave it to others to say more about not producing the microdata. It has, for the data user's perspective, it may not really be that noticeable because the same tables that would be produced in the microdata are also released directly by producing the tables directly. That's what data users will see. It will be some challenges behind the scenes. As I mentioned in the positives and negatives, it may allow us to produce data quicker, may allow us to produce data that's more accurate, but when it's all said and done, we won't be left with that microdata that's been protected that could then be used for other purposes. I think I'll stop there with my responses to your question and see if Cynthia or if anybody else would like to add to that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jason. That was really helpful. With those microdata, so the detailed, or one question that I have, I guess, along those lines too, is whether or not the demonstration products that you're planning to come out with will be released for all of the tables that are planned for production. Because I think, so if you're not going to have microdata ever produced, right, then you won't be able to release microdata in the demonstration data products, as you mentioned. So which tables would be included in demonstration data so that users can evaluate that? I think that's another question, I guess, to grapple with.
And this is Jason Devine again from Census. I guess we're supposed to say that each time. When we initially were developing the set of metrics that were released for the PL product, that was before the split between the disclosure system that was going to protect the PL product and the DHC was made. So we developed a whole series of metrics that covered both the PL product and the DHC. Although we're still open for input on those and we could add metrics, those have already been prepared and they're available now, and you could read documentation. You could look at those metrics that have been released for the PL, and what you'll see is where it's a DHC table, it's just blank because the information wasn't produced. There's a sort of somebody just telling me my video is not on, but the indications seem to be saying to me that it is. But there will have to be some time. The timing of that has to be worked out, and I'm not sure of how the timing is going to play out with the decisions about what tables will be included versus the production of demonstration products. I think we would probably make decisions about the final formulation of the DHC before producing any demonstration products. But I'll let Cynthia add anything to that if she thinks she knows more about how that process will play out than I do. I'm sorry if my video is not showing. It seems to should be.
Yes, we miss you, Jason. I don't know what's going on. But no, as we work internally to make the decisions around the no microdata, our intention would be to produce demonstration data on the data products that we plan to produce. So the production tables, we would be producing demonstration data for those tables, including metrics.
This is Rochelle Winkler. Great. Thank you very much, Cynthia, for clarifying that. Jay, did you want to open it up to other committee for questions or comments? I'll turn things over to you, I think.
All right. Thanks, Rochelle. This is Jay Bright. So now, CSAC committee members, the floor is open for questions and comments, and please use your little icon to raise your hand. And, well, there's John Chaika. John, go ahead.
John Chaika. I just wanted to clarify that if the Bureau does not produce the very detailed microdata that underlie the DHC, does that preclude the sample public use microdata files that so many users use?
So we have not made decisions around the public use microdata file as of yet. Those conversations, we know the no microdata could impact that and would impact that, but that has not been discussions that we have had yet as we focused on this next tier of product. But we will certainly consider those implications as we make those further decisions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kunal Talwar.
Hi, Kunal Talwar, CSAC. Yeah, so thank you for the great presentations. My question was in regards to the evaluation. So I guess you'll have the demonstration products and a workshop to have the user community give feedback. I guess the risk there is that the user community will basically ask for more and more utility, and I'm wondering how we are planning to evaluate how much privacy risk we are incurring as we add more and more privacy budget. And I guess in the same vein, I think it would make sense to bring some of the privacy advocates to these workshops as well.
Does anyone want to speak to that?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question part of that.
So the question was, the question is, how is the Bureau going to evaluate if a certain privacy budget is too disclosive or a certain release does not satisfy the privacy requirements that the Bureau has?
Sure. So
I just hesitated a little bit on our response because I think my focus and our focus of data products has been use cases and the usability of the data for those use cases and what level of accuracy is necessary for that. And then I think some of the work by the others who are working on the disclosure avoidance system are focused more on the privacy side of it, kind of as part of that privacy accuracy trade-off. We look at both of those together, but from the data product perspective, I'm thinking of it in terms of the data products and what level of accuracy is necessary to meet the use case needs, which I think is similar to how the work proceeded with the system that protected the PL data.
And this is Michael Hawes from the Census Bureau. I can also chime in here. So as we continue our work on developing the DAS algorithms for the DHC product, we're also going to be paying close attention to the privacy loss accounting, both in terms of the overall privacy loss budget, but more specifically to privacy loss by attribute and by geographic level, with a particular eye towards being able to demonstrate that we're keeping that under control vis-a-vis like known vectors of attack. We'll also be continuing our work with the simulated attacks, so doing additional reconstruction, vetted re-identification, simulated attacks at various levels of privacy loss budget to demonstrate that we are effectively able to protect against those types of privacy attacks.
Thanks, Michael. That's very useful. Would the Bureau be releasing more information about these attacks? What class of attacks are you going to consider, and is there going to be a document describing these attacks in more detail?
I think it's a little premature to know exactly what kinds of documentation we'll be producing about those, but as we continue that work, we will be communicating the results.
Thanks.
John Abel, you had your hand up for a moment. Did you want to speak to this?
I put my hand down because I didn't know if Michael could speak. He's not in the speaker's box. He's in the audience box. So he covered most of what I wanted to say. I will just add that the workshop will be conducted under the auspices of the Committee on National Statistics, and as they did in 2019, they will invite privacy experts to participate, and we will certainly endeavor to support that participation just as we support the participation of stakeholders who have specific accuracy use cases. So that, it is our hope that we can have a robust discussion of how to do the disclosure avoidance on an extended set of products. And Michael doesn't usually go into the technical weeds, so by having him go first, we avoid my tendency to do that. I just do want to point out that the requirement to produce microdata for the DHC interacted with the specification of tables down to the block level does, just as Rochelle pointed out, exponentially explode the computational issue. Instead of being 16.6 billion noisy measurements as we used for redistricting, there would be approximately 14 trillion noisy measurements as we did if we do the DHC according to the current proposals down to the block level. And we are capable of doing that. Both sets of DHC programs, persons and units, currently run, and they run within a reasonable time frame, 1 to 3 days. So it is technically possible, but it represents putting privacy loss budget on an enormous number of tabulations that are not planned for public dissemination. So as Cynthia and Jason have pointed out, we really do need to have a discussion now about what the data products will look like, and then we can refine the options. It is not a major reprogramming to bypass in the DAS to bypass the microdata step. It is a major reprogramming in tabulation to bypass the microdata step.
Thank you, John. And I'd like to call on Kristen Moore as a comment or question.
Kristen Moore. I was pleased to see the detailed data on sex by age for single year of age for people under the age of 20. That kind of detail is very valuable for people who are working on issues related to children. You know, a 1-year-old is very different than a 3 or 4-year-old. The balancing of privacy and accuracy, though, is clearly a concern. And if that comes to it, I would say that gender is probably less important than single year of age.
Thanks, Kristen. I see Mario Marazzi has his hand up.
Hi. Yes, but so does Kuno. Is there something else you wanted to add? Or you've had it longer than I have.
Well, I think that was just not taking it down from before.
So I really want to thank Jason Devine and Cynthia, right, for their extraordinary presentation. I mean, I think they're finally, putting it together, as you will, and it's a complicated set of parameters that they're landing this census on. I do want to ask you guys because I didn't hear it mentioned, and maybe it's sort of obvious. Just reflects my I haven't been able to connect the dots as well. How does this release? It's not really a release schedule. It's a conceptual schedule of when we might release, right? But it does have implications for a release schedule. So how does that hypothetical release schedule compare to say, last decade? I mean, can you give us a sense of that?
Sure. So last decade, of course, we had many things we were dealing with, but last decade we would release redistricting. Let me take a step back. all of the data products would be released off of one microdata file. So it's really hard to compare, but keeping that in mind, we would have released the data in March and April of the census year, that redistricting data. And then within that summer, 2 months later, we had moved on and were beginning to release the demographic profiles. And then later that year, we started releasing Summary File 1. So Summary File 1 data. So that would have all been in the census year. And then the following year, we would have started releasing more detailed data. So we're already a year out. And it's not just due to DAS implementation. It's obviously other reasons, but recognizing we're in a different world now where the data are being protected by various algorithms, so we had to break off those data products. But generally, redistricting, demographic profiles would have been in the same year, just a couple of months apart.
I think the pandemic throws you a bone of about a year, right?
Yes.
I think that if I try to characterize data users' overall tolerance, on average, which is very hard because there's all sorts of users. People who do their master's thesis using PUMS data for the next 10 years is a segment that comes to mind. People who are doing environmental stuff, looking at very small scale geography, a completely different ballgame. They're also potentially impacted. Just this morning, we got a public comment of someone that, really, it raised my eyebrow, how it could affect studies of insects in Louisiana, the way this person was seeing it. So this is huge and broad implications. I'm calling from Puerto Rico, and controlling the insects is something I hope that we can aspire to do better every day. So I'm concerned about what I'm reading, and I urge committee members to think of the historic moment in which the Census Bureau finds itself. We worked through to get this to this point, and I just want you guys to really think through, because at the end of the day, as amazing a project management process you are doing just to get external stakeholder engagement on the use cases, there is no way we can anticipate all use cases ever. No matter how much effort you put into it, there's no way you can anticipate a use that will happen 7 years from now for some, new virus that only affects parts of, rural Kentucky. Who knows? And so I'm concerned, and I urge everyone to remind themselves that usefulness depends on timeliness, and so getting the data out as fast as possible is always and has been the Bureau's commitment. I just hope that you guys continue your commitment to let everyone know, as you've been saying, when you know it, that the schedule has been revised, right? Because we are, as data users, all anxiously awaiting. So is that a question or comment? I don't know, but I hope it sort of helped everyone think through some of the major implications that we're talking about.
Thank you, Mario. I appreciate that. And I think I may have been saying of the census year, but I mean the year following the census, so in year one.
That's right.
So thank you.
That's right.
I appreciate your comment.
Well, I'd like to recognize Lance Waller with a question or comment.
So this is Lance Waller. Thanks for the two great presentations. I think this is more of a comment than a question, but I'm noticing both personally when I read the statements about microdata and then hearing our questions, we keep asking you about microdata details, and I think that's going to be a continuing communication challenge in the sense that the broader data use population, the stakeholders, probably don't think about microdata as quite as specifically as the actual definition goes to. So John Chek's question earlier clarified, a difference between the public use microdata. That decision hasn't been made, but there's implications about this. So I would encourage us to think about you're having to answer the same questions again and again. So if there's some information to put out about how the microdata decision goes and what it implies, it kind of feels like my first reaction is no microdata, and then I hear some of the explanation. I go, oh, okay, I understand a little more. I will get to the tables that I need. And I feel like you're going to be on the defensive or one step back for a lot of the discussions. And I agree with Mario. This is a really important decision with big implications, and there will be a lot of strongly held opinions. And I think there might be time well spent in having a clearer description to start from, rather than saying we're deciding what to do with the microdata, because it seems to pull in initial responses that then you have to overcome. So just a comment on that I think we all have an embedded love for microdata, knowing that it's there somewhere, but it may not be that all the stakeholders actually use microdata when they come down to it, and what they use may well be available in the products. So any thoughts you have on that, I'd appreciate. Thank you.
This is Jason Devine. Thank you for that comment, and I think one of the ideas of wanting to communicate the idea that we're considering this, although I agree we could have spent a little more time talking about what that, the implications, what that really means, what we're really talking about when we talk about microdata. I think one of the purposes of talking about it as soon as we started considering this was so that we could get feedback from others in case there were unanticipated consequences that we hadn't considered. So, one of the ideas is we can think about it internally from our perspective and what the implications are, but we also want to hear if there are other implications that we have not considered.
Yeah, and I agree that's very important, and thanks for having that on the planning horizon.
All right, thank you all.
So, Jay, I wanted to jump in once again. Mario Marazzi here, if you don't mind. So just a quick thought also. I mean, I think that these debates also need to be informed by what the role of the Research Data Center program is going to be over the next decade. The RDC was started over the last decade or two, and it has proved its worth. The Census Bureau now is housing, in fact, data for other federal agencies. So this is something you're going to continue to do, and the Bureau should develop an expertise in doing it. But, I've always felt that the RDC could be much more. I don't know exactly how, and I'm not proposing any specific way here now, but I do believe that if some of these data sets were available in an RDC environment instead of out in the public more easily, perhaps some of the hurdles of not having microdata, for instance, might be easier to digest by the user community. But it would, of course, require the Bureau to plan and prepare for a more active engagement with its users, providing these sorts of facilities in more places, making it easier to get your proposals through, receiving more proposals, in fact, in the first place, having to evaluate more of them, and making it not just about benefit to the Census Bureau processes, but maybe even other types of studies, which is one of the big limitations to RDC studies. You have to propose something that benefits Census Bureau methodology. And as long as that's the only way to access RDC data, it remains very limited for the wide universe of data users could think of that they could use with that sort of data. So just a thought for you guys to also add on.
Thank you, Mario. And this is Jay Bright again, and we need to wrap this discussion up, so I'll hand it back over to Tommy Wright.
Tommy, this is John Aboud. Could I respond to Mario's last comment?
Yes, please, John. Yes.
Thank you for that comment. The FSRDC network is a thriving asset of the federal statistical community. There are some misconceptions, though, about what has been historically available in the RDC network. The census edited file has never been available in the RDC network. What was made available to researchers in the RDC network historically was the 100% detail file, the swapped data. That is also true for the American Community Survey. The raw American Community Survey is not available in the Research Data Center. The swapped and disclosure protected, but not with all necessarily the same disclosure protections, but the swapped file is what's in the RDC. Those things don't have any equivalent for the 2020 census at the moment. So we are researching how to provide reasonable access to the data assets from the 2020 census that we do not release publicly, consistent with our longstanding practice not to expose the census edited file to internal or RDC researchers if that exposure could compromise the disclosure avoidance protections. That's why researchers used the 100% detail file, the swapped file historically, and not the unswapped file. So it's not as straightforward a question. With respect to access, we have many more options now in the way in which the RDC network deploys data to its users. There is a virtual option. That virtual option was in pilot, but the Census Bureau has committed to moving that virtual option into production for those data assets that we control fully, and the Census of Population and Housing is certainly one of those. So thanks for beginning that discussion and engagement, and there's much more that we need to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I want to thank the presenters from the previous session, Cynthia, Jason, and Rochelle for the discussion, as well as the members of the committee for the discussion. Thank you very much. Before we take our break, and when we meet in person, we typically have an introduction of senior staff, some senior leadership at the Bureau, and there are about, I think, 5 here today, and I really like the Jay's going around the table. So I want to, perhaps starting with Nick, then Al, maybe then Tori, then Tim, if I covered everyone. Maybe could you take just a minute to introduce yourself? Nick, would you? And John, of course. But Nick?
Sure. Thanks, Tommy. I am Nick Orsini. I'm the Associate Director for Economic Programs at the Census Bureau. So I see many of the business programs at the Census Bureau, including an economic census every 5 years, beginning in years that end with a 2 or a 7. So we're gearing up for the economic census for 2022, and the economic census covers about 8 million businesses. And we use a lot of survey, but also a lot of administrative data for the economic census.
Thank you, Nick. Al?
Yes, good morning. I'm Al Fontenot, the Associate Director for Decennial Census Programs, the American Community Survey, and our Geographic Services. It is a pleasure to be able to work with the Census Scientific Advisory Committee because you helped us in the formation and development of a lot of the technological ideas that came to fruition in the 2020 census early in the process as we thought about ways to advance the census. We have some things that are going to be very exciting that we're thinking about doing for 2030. And we are going to be coming to the CSAC, maybe looking for a team to work with us on a couple of those ideas because they are departures from the way we do things today, and they're very exciting. I had an opportunity this morning to spend in the Suitland facility saying goodbye and thank you to a number of our term and temporary employees who are leaving today, and I wanted to be there to thank them for their participation. And they were excited and looking forward to hopefully coming back to work for the census again. But thank you all.
Thank you, Al. Tori?
Hi, I'm Tori Velkoff. I'm the Associate Director for Demographic Programs and the Chief Demographer. I oversee all of the household surveys with the exception of the American Community Survey, but we do provide the subject matter expertise for the ACS. I'm also responsible for the population estimates, the income and poverty and health insurance releases that you might have seen last week. and I'm very happy to be here with CSAC. And I just want to report that I'm calling in from sunny but cold upstate New York.
Thank you, Tori. John?
Good afternoon again. I'm John Abowd, the Associate Director for Research and Methodology and Chief Scientist. Inside the Research and Methodology Directorate, there are 5 centers that engage in research and experimental product development and work with all of the production directorates that you're more familiar with. I think you probably all know that disclosure avoidance is in the Research and Methodology Directorate, but so is the enterprise dissemination, including the FSRDC network and CEDSCI. And Tommy is in Research and Methodology. He's the chief of the Center for Statistical Research and Methodology. We also have the Center for Behavioral Science Methods, a Center for Economic Studies, which does a great deal of support for Nick's area, the Economics Directorate. I'm pretty sure I didn't miss one. Oh, yes, and the Center for Optimization and Data Science. I knew I ticked off 5 fingers and only got to 4. The Center for Optimization and Data Science, which is supports many of the advanced computational and statistical activities that the Census Bureau is engaged in. I love the CSAC meetings. I love the NAC meetings. They're an opportunity to get up close and personal with serious stakeholders. So thank you all very much for your participation.
Thank you, John. Tim.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I got to tell you, it's awesome to be part of these convenings of these meetings yesterday and today. My name is Tim Olson. I'm the Associate Director for Field Operations. And what that means is I'm the senior person responsible for everything that happens at the National Processing Center in our regional offices, where we've got usually about 7,000 to 8,000 field representatives that are engaging and collecting in-person household visits. Also, I've got a real data scientist kind of a group at Census headquarters called the Office of Survey and Census Analytics, and in some ways they interact a lot with John's area and with the Demographic Directorate and the Decennial Directorate, and soon to be probably Nick's area as well in the econ area. So we're the group that knocks on doors, makes phone calls, processes paper forms, sends out materials for staff throughout the entire nation, and does probably the most active interaction with people throughout the United States. So it's great to be here with you. I really appreciate your insights. We need it, and thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, everyone. I think I've covered all the ones that I see on the participants list. It's 12:28. Let's take a 10-minute break, and can we return at 12:38? We will be a little bit behind, but we could perhaps make it up. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, everyone. I would like to turn things back over to your host, Tommy Wright. You may begin.
Tommy Wright. Now, committee members, Matthew Freites will present on the count question resolution. There's a discussant, Kristen Moore, and there will also be committee discussion. Matthew?
All right. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. Well, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. As was already discussed, my name is Matt Freites. I'm the branch chief of the Count Question Resolution branch here in the Census Bureau in the Decennial Census Management Division. Next slide, please. I don't believe I'm sharing. Yes. So this presentation, the goal here is to really give a high-level overview and a general idea of the scope of the CQR operation. The goal really, and I think this is really important, is to improve the quality of the base that's going to be used for these post-2020 census population estimates. The Census Bureau employed a robust quality assurance process along the way for many of the operations that took place during the decennial census. And despite our efforts to do everything that we could to assure every household and person was accounted for, this program or this operation exists so that eligible governmental units can request a review of counts of housing and population by identifying specific blocks in their inquiry that they feel may be erroneous or that they want us to look at. As we're doing our research, the corrections will be issued when necessary to either the tribal chairperson or the highest elected official or somebody that they designate as their official, designee on their behalf of any of the affected governmental units. And when we have these results, they will be uploaded to a website that will go live later in the year, and those will be posted as a RADA. The corrections will be reflected in the Future Population Estimates program. There are a few things that that the CQR won't do, and one of them is we will not revise the apportionment data that gets sent to the Office of the President. We will also not be affecting any of the redistricting data that's sent to the states, and also nor will we be changing the demographic and housing characteristics file. CQR may not collect any new data, so we are not allowed to do that, and it's also not the same as a special census. And I think this is also important as well, that CQR is not a mechanism to address data concerns due to disclosure avoidance methods that are applied. We keep our scope this way because of the quality assurance processes that I talked about. And again, we are going to look for these processing errors that took place, and if we find one, we will be notifying and publishing these results as we have them. Next slide, please. So the scope in general is the three geographic outcomes here, the geographic cases that you're looking at. And, we put these up here in a visual sense to kind of get a general idea of what they are. There's two different cases with these scenarios that are embedded. There is a living quarters count case, which has both a geocoding correction and a possible living quarters, a coverage correction. And then there is a boundary case, which is separate from the other two. The geocoding correction is when the Census Bureau is reviewing the geographic location of living quarters within a specified 2020 census tabulation block. And a coverage error or a coverage correction is when the Census Bureau is reviewing the specified blocks that are put in by the governmental unit to see if we maybe have excluded valid housing and population inadvertently during the initial response data processing. And again, this is very much about data processing errors as it relates to these geographic scenarios. For a boundary case, the Census Bureau will do a review of the legal governmental unit boundaries in effect as of January 1st in 2020, as well as the associated living quarters that were affected by these boundaries one way or the other. When we talk about a processing error, an example of that would be, let's say that there is a housing unit address that is listed on an update leave ad sheet, but that address was never actually processed within the master address file the database, essentially. So that's very rare because of these quality control methods that we have along the way, but it is an example of one of the rare cases of a processing error that could be seen by our researchers. Next slide, please. So back when I gave this presentation before, we had talked about the feedback that we had received during our federal register from numerous stakeholders regarding the scope and both the start date of CQR. We did take a look at this, and we responded to this feedback, or in response to this feedback, we did change the start date, which was initially supposed to be in October, and is now in January of 2022, January 3rd. We also considered an expansion of CQR's scope for 2020 to allow governments to essentially submit cases requesting a review of group quarters population counts that considered administrative records supplied by the government as part of their submission. However, during the legal the legal review that we had this week, we found out that federal law requires data collection for the decennial census to end, and this occurs once the apportionment results are delivered to Congress and the President. Therefore, the Census Bureau cannot continue collecting response data after this time, and that means that the CQR operation, which is a part of that, is not allowed to collect new information, and that's one of the things that this potential scope would have allowed for. So we can only correct those errors that occurred during the processing of information collected during 2020 enumeration. We will continue to research the feasibility of allowing governments to request these reviews through other avenues, not the CQR operation. And again, the goal would be to improve, as needed, the population baseline used for population estimates throughout the decade within the legal boundaries that bound that program. Next slide, please. So for cases that come in, this is essentially a day in the life, so to speak, or a day in the life of the case. And, again, these governments, tribal, state, local governments, will review the 2020 census results that have been published, and if they suspect errors within the boundaries or their housing counts, they can file a case with us. The staff, my staff, will receive these cases. We'll review the materials that we receive for correctness and completeness and determine, based off of the information given, whether this case is in scope or not. In-scope cases, when we have them, will be sent to our geographic subject matter experts, and they will research them for any potential errors and then come to a resolution. And during that research, we will review the 2020 census enumeration and processing records in conjunction with whatever evidence is supplied within the case of the governmental unit. I think it's also important to note that research may or may not find processing errors, but no matter whether they're in scope, out of scope, errors or not, we will be communicating along the way heavily to make sure that, one, we have all the information that we need to be able to do a complete review and research of this, and also to let you know the time frame of the case and so forth. So there will be a lot of communication. That's a big part of our operations. And like I said, if there is nothing found, no updates will be made, and the case will be considered closed. But if they are found, and I said this before, we will post them as errata, and our Census Bureau records and systems will be updated as appropriate. At the end of every case, a disposition will be provided, and that will be provided to the appropriate person, whether it's the highest elected official or the designee or the tribal chairperson of any of those impacted governments, and we will post all of those results as errata as the operation continues. Slide, please. Next slide, Stevie. So this slide kind of just shows some key dates out here. I mentioned the change in the start date. What we are looking at now is September of 21, which we're in. We're almost done somehow. We will complete the delivery of the 2020 census data to the states for redistricting purposes. And when the fall happens, which we are in now, we are looking to put our Federal Register notice back out for that 30-day public comment period, which is a place where the information that I'm giving here, plus some additional, will be made available for the public to see. One of the things we've always strived for is to have communication via like an email blast or a letter sort of announcing the program, as well as a flyer that will go out with it with more detailed information on how to participate, numbers to call, and other resources. That will happen in December of 2021, December 1st. And that is going to be basically the program is here. Here's a way to contact us, and our phone lines will be open, our website will be open, and all of the resources that I will note on the next slide will be made available for public consumption. We will begin case acceptance in January of 2022, and we will, the research will continue. We will stop taking cases on June 30th of 2023. So you're looking at about an 18-month window for case submission to the Census Bureau, and all of the research and dispositions must be completed by September 30th of 2023. Those last two dates of June 30th and September 30th did not change with the start date change that we made. Next slide, please. So where are we now? Basically, we are still doing everything that we can to get the Federal Register notice comments updated, our responses to those, and again, all the documentation out for public consumption for the 30-day comment period. All of the resources that we will have and documentation that we have, which is listed here, FAQs for the public, participant guides, which is a very lengthy document on how to participate every single way that you can, the flyer that will go out with that initial announcement of the program, as well as all the letters that we will use in an in-scope or out-of-scope, here are your results type way, and the website, which is going to house all of these things. We are working on all of that to make sure that we are ready to go so that when December 1st happens, our phone lines open, we will be able to answer questions and help any participant smooth their transition to working with the CQR team to get their case in and whatever resolution comes out of that. Next slide. I promised I would be quick, and that is all that I have for this presentation, but I know that there will be questions, so fire away.
Great, thank you very much, Matthew. I'd like to now introduce Kristen Moore, who will be the Ctac Discussion.
Thank you, Kristen Moore. I'll also try to be brief. I listened to the webinar on this, and I remember feeling that it sounded like two phases. First, there's this count, question, resolution work, and then second, it's whatever follows afterward. The count, question, resolution process seems to me to be an excellent idea. It represents an important element for assuring data quality in the future, because it will inform future census operations. It will also correct inevitable errors, and it sets the base for the demographics, which should improve population data in the future. In addition, it should strengthen the confidence of states and communities that accuracy is the goal of the Census Bureau. This work seems particularly important for the 2020 census, given that some people and households left their usual residence because of COVID and because of the difficulty of counting people in group quarters. It seems that the process will rely on the actual census count data, and this information will be used to inform future population estimates, but it will not result in a change in the number of people counted in 2020. Rather, where people are located may be revised. The fact that the census will now entertain challenges at the block level seems likely to further increase the challenges and revisions. The process actually seems to be burdensome and time-consuming, but the fact that so many states, I thought, and communities engage in the process suggests that they find it very valuable. However, the details of this process and how the process is implemented are rather sparse, and I guess that's in part because we're all using the future tense. Moving to phase 2, some questions there. I couldn't help but wonder how large the questions are, how large they've been in the past, and what happens to the information if a considerable undercount is found, or if the count is found to be too high. What happens if a change is required that involves group quarters? One assumes that substantial revisions would have to be made in future estimates, but it's not clear how, when, or for what purposes these changes are made, or at what level of geography changes might be made. And what happens if the apparent problem is due to differential privacy, if that's even possible? In addition, it seems that this work might have implications for other census projects like CPAC's post-enumeration survey or FRAMES, and I don't know whether these connections are being pursued. So, in sum, the information presented so far shares a laudable overview of the count question resolution process itself, but little about what happens to the information that arises from this work in the future. In other words, we've heard about the first multi-step, multi-year phase, but not what I think is kind of an interesting question, the forward-looking phase that follows. So as the work unfolds, additional updates would be very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Did you have, and Kristen, Matthew, did you have any responses to that before moving on to the broader discussion?
None that I think are necessarily prudent with the information that we are providing. I don't know if anybody from the Census Bureau, I know that some of my colleagues are on the line, wanted to provide anything more in-depth, but I do know that we are providing this information this way to sort of, again, set the tone for what we are trying to do. And I think we do not have details as to everything that happens with the data because there are so many different scenarios that could happen, and we just don't know until we see it. So that's why there is a long window to do this research. And again, you know, the programs that happen after CQR are out of my realm, so I can't speak to those, but I just know that, you know, anything that will happen during CQR will be considered during those programs. I just do not have the breadth of knowledge because it's not my area of expertise.
Thank you. So this is Jay Bright. I did want to ask a question because it looks like one of your slides is hot off the presses. So there's new developments on that slide regarding the legal ruling and also the other avenues that were possible that other governments might request to review group quarters population counts through other avenues. And that sounds a little like Count Review 2, which was truncated. We're just wondering, what might that look like? Do you have more ideas on what might be possible within that brand new bullet?
I do not. Again, this will fall outside of CQR, and the legal review basically proved that CQR is not allowed to do this. But what that could look like will be outside of mine, and I see, Al, you can speak to this if you want. I just want to point out that it is just CQR will not be doing this, but I don't have any information besides that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question, Jay. We don't know what this other provision will look like. We know that we will do it under provision of Section 6 of Title 13, which allows us to collect data independent of census data, and that will allow us to structure a method of allowing governments to come in and challenge or ask questions on group quarters like we were planning to do as part of CQR, but it'll be outside of CQR, and our goal would still be to enable changes that would affect the population estimates going forward on a new basis. But since that decision happened Wednesday of this week, we have not yet developed a new methodology to approach that. What had happened was some of our leadership on my team had been meeting with a number of constituents and attempting to develop a way that we could provide a tool for them to bring information to the census for changes where we notice. And because of COVID, group quarters was a primary concern. It still is, and so we're just going to have to find another method to accomplish the same thing. We cannot just add it on to CQR as a part of CQR. But to answer your question, no, we don't know how that's going to look yet.
And just, this is Jay Bright again, just a follow-up. Thank you very much, Al. So we now, the first version of these slides said that group quarters would be in scope for CQR, and now this legal ruling effectively puts them out of scope entirely, or only in this?
Not really, Jay. They're still in scope under the criteria that CQR normally allows people to ask questions. We're broadening that criteria, and we're not allowed to broaden that criteria, basically.
Gotcha. Thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification. And I'd like to open it up to broader Ctac discussion. And I see Tom Burnell, you've got your hand up?
Yes, thanks, Jay. This is Tom Burnell. I did two sort of quick questions. I was wondering what sort of workload are you expecting from this thing? You know, how many communities are going to take advantage of this? And then also I was wondering, and maybe I'm sort of misthinking this, but to what extent differential privacy kind of affects the ability for localities, municipalities to check the accuracy of the count? It seems like that would affect it somehow. Thank you.
Right. So, sure. Thank you. So I can't speak to the differential privacy aspect of it. I just know that, this is not the avenue for us to change it if you suspect something from differential privacy, and Dr. Abad is on the line. But as far as your first question, as a workload, I mean, we anticipate, to get a significant amount of inquiries. But if you look historically at the data, especially from 2010, the amount of changes that were made was very insignificant compared to the large scope of the census. But because of everything that happened this year, we, of course, are we're looking for more inquiries. But as far as how many states, how many governments, and so forth, we don't really have the ability to know that because it's not similar to another operation where you have a very finite workload. We are anticipating being ready to answer any questions that we can from any government that we receive questions from, but it's not. There's no real finite number that says we're going to receive X from Tennessee or X from Alabama or something like that.
John Abad, it looks like you have your hand up. Did you want to speak to this?
Thanks. This is John Abad. And thanks for handing off the question. So senior executives at the Census Bureau carefully reviewed the data requirements for the account question resolution program and determined that the confidentiality protections applied to the 2020 census data products would not affect the inquiries that can be made under CQR. So the location of a housing unit is something that can be challenged, but the number of housing units was not modified by the disclosure avoidance system. So the kinds of questions that are legal under CQR can be addressed without modifying the disclosure avoidance system. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Are there other questions or comments from CSAC members? Rochelle?
Hi, everyone. This is Rochelle Winkler. I just have one more clarifying question based on the questions about group quarters and the various ways that they can be addressed through this program. So say a prison is not showing up in the data. If it's not showing up because it was geocoded to like the wrong county, for instance, then that would be something that you could review through this program. This is my understanding. I'm just making sure that this is correct. But say if the prison is not showing up in the data because the prison administrator just never submitted the data during the census. So say they just never turned in whatever the Bureau requested of them, and so no population was counted there, that could not be reviewed under this under county resolution. Is that
right?
Correctly?
So I'm hesitant to say generally yes, only because there are so many intricacies to every case that it's not necessarily that way every time. And I want to stress the processing errors part of it. We do stress that because it's errors that occur because of the data processing that happens. So it's not a guarantee that every case that would be like A or B would be in or out of scope. And so I don't want to say yes blanketly. I think it will depend, again, on the nature of the case, the information that's provided, and what our researchers find, which is why when I give this presentation, I try to caveat that it's difficult, if not impossible, to say, yes, your case would be in scope, or no, it would not be, just because we don't know until we start getting information in.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there other questions or comments from CSAC members? Their hands up. The last call for questions or comments. All right, I guess we'll hand it back over to Tommy Wright. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Thank you.
Tommy Wright, thank you, Jay. Thank you very much, Matthew and Kristen and committee for the discussion. Now we'll hear from James Burton, Linda Metcalf on the annual integrated economic survey. There is a discussant, Lance Waller, and the committee discussion as well. So James and Belinda.
Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thank you for having us today for the annual integrated economic survey program overview. My name is Belinda Metcalf. I am the annual integrated economic survey manager for the economy-wide statistics division. I am joined today by James Burton. He is the annual integrated economic survey program coordinator. So I'll start today by providing a little background. The annual integrated economic survey journey began with a National Academies of Sciences panel review of the Economics Directorate's portfolio of annual surveys. They evaluated the survey's design, operations, and products over several years and provided recommendations in 2018. The recommendations focused on what the data users want, need, and use, the business register, harmonization of questionnaires and data collection processes, sampling and estimation, editing, imputation, disclosure control and quality standards, dissemination, and looking towards an integrated annual business survey system to replace the current suite of largely separate annual economic surveys. From the report, the Economics Directorate started several cross-divisional working groups to review and prioritize the key recommendations, develop scope, develop preliminary studies, and perform research and outreach. The ultimate goal of this effort will be one consolidated annual survey, taking the place of the 6 individual in-scope surveys. The name for the new program is the Annual Integrated Economic Survey. For the purpose of today's presentation, I will refer to the Annual Integrated Economic Survey as AIES, or AIES. We chose this name for a couple different reasons. It will be an annual survey. Therefore, this name clearly states the time period, and it also indicates that multiple trades are brought together to cover and report out on the economy. Econ senior leaders felt that it was important to highlight the integration of the various surveys covering multiple industries under the umbrella of this one survey. We should see it, there we go. This visual shows our transition from the current state of our annual business surveys to the future state of the integrated annual, along with a very high-level timeline. From the 11 in-scope annuals identified in the NAS panel recommendations, we are starting with the 6 surveys listed here for initial implementation. The Services Annual Survey, the Annual Retail Trade Survey, Annual Wholesale Trade Survey, the Annual Capital Expenditures Survey, the Annual Survey of Manufacturers, and the Manufacturing Shipments, Inventories, and Unfilled Orders. We are re-engineering these 6 annual surveys by combining survey lifecycle activities to create an aligned program combining similar content, coordinating samples and collection, improving the frame, and updating processing, all with the ultimate goal to provide more relevant economy-wide data to the data users. Discussions around the annual integrated economic survey began shortly after receiving the NAS panel recommendations, with the first real task starting in 2019. Planned mail-out for the new survey is early 2024 for a 2023 survey year. Next slide. So why did we request the NAS panel review to begin with? Most importantly, we needed to meet data users' needs for more timely, granular, and standardized economy-wide data. We need to improve our efficiency and consistency across our programs and our content, processing, and systems. We need to stay relevant within the data user community. And as many of you know, we have been suffering declining budgets and response rates for our surveys. So the panel's recommendations help us move towards meeting these needs. Next slide. So here is a quick glimpse of 2 charts that show the many stakeholders of this project. Those groups and individuals that we plan to keep abreast of project progress and updates occurring to the economic surveys that are in scope to this effort. We plan to provide seminars, webinars, present at meetings, and conferences. You will also notice that we include enterprise collaboration, as we will utilize enterprise systems and programs for the new integrated annual survey. Next slide. So next, I'd like to highlight some of the accomplishments to date. Stakeholder engagement is vital to the success of the new survey, including both internal and external stakeholders, both respondents and data users. The Stakeholder Engagement Plan identifies internal and external project stakeholders. It plans the communication between project stakeholders, documents how information is distributed and how stakeholder expectations are managed, and provides direction on how project performance is reported. It lays out how all of these key elements with details on how we are tracking communication with various stakeholders, as well as how we are providing project updates on a routine basis. This CSAC meeting being just one of the many communication vehicles we are using to keep everyone in the loop. The annual program requirements were needed as an input to sample design. We created a document that is being used as the foundation to begin building the new annual integrated program. The annual program requirements is an evolving document that will change or be modified as our math stats work through sample design. The document includes information related to general requirements, frequency of collection, coordinated sample, data items, NAICS levels, classification systems, the use of administrative data, non-employer coverage, industry coverage, geography, and reliability constraints or CD levels. We built a repository to house all of our existing content. All content collected, which is all content collected on our in-scope surveys to eyes. We assign topics and subtopics to all of the content in an effort to organize the content in a meaningful way. A few examples of topics include revenue, expenses, or assets. The subject matter areas evaluated the content to determine what needed to be kept, modified, or removed. We consulted stakeholders. Internally, this included the Centers for Economic Studies and our indicator programs. Externally, we consulted our key federal stakeholders, BEA, BLS, FRB, and CMS. These stakeholders documented how they use our content, if it's critical to their programs, what products they produce from our data, what level of detail they need, and when they need it. Once we evaluated the information provided by our stakeholders, the subject matter areas did a second pass of evaluating what should be kept, modified, or removed. Once this work was complete, we began to align and harmonize the content across the trades that overlap between our current annual programs and eyes. Next, we began developing modules by topic and subtopic and began mapping the content. Later in the presentation, there will be a slide that will display the current module layout and design we are proposing. We conducted a study on record-keeping practices and data accessibility. A few notable findings from this study include NAICS misclassification. Mapping records to corresponding NAICS can be challenging for some respondents. The second takeaway is that businesses are using a plethora of operating units. When asked about establishments, for example, respondents indicated that their company structure may not be reflective of our understanding of establishments. For example, some companies are organized by region, office, department, line of business, or business segment, or they did not track by individual location at all. The third finding was insight into the company's response processes. Almost all respondents indicated that completing Census Bureau surveys requires more than one person in the company to respond. Next slide. We carried out a coordinated collection pilot, consolidating contacts and communication between companies for 3 of our in-scope annual surveys. We are currently in the second year of using a consolidated contact for select overlapping cases of ART, AUS, and SAC. We are conducting follow-up operations at this time and staying in line with the regular annual survey timeline. SAC and AUS will close at the end of September, and ART will close at the end of October. Using the scope input from the annual program requirements document, we developed from our business register a list of active business units that met EYE's requirements and include required geography, classification, and measure of size information needed to construct sampling units. Where possible, we aligned EYE's criteria with that used for the economic census. And the sampling team is expanding on research done as part of a divisional collaborathon on sampling unit and frame construction, coordinating sampling and stratification to propose an overall sampling framework for the EYES program. Next slide. As I discussed, EYES will be a consolidation of 6 different annual surveys. Now that these surveys will be under one umbrella, we are processing a collection instrument that we are proposing a collection instrument that will collect data by module. Each module will be populated with content that is topic-based. This slide shows a snapshot of the draft modules that we are considering. So you'll see Module 1 includes business classification, business characteristics, high-level company totals, and sector breakouts, as well as some questions regarding collection process or how we plan to funnel respondents through the remaining modules. Module 2 contains detailed revenues, products, and detailed expenses. Module 3 is where we plan to collect assets, such as capital expenditures, inventories, and liabilities. And Module 4 at this point is a placeholder for any topics that we haven't covered in previous modules or where we may want to add rotating content or experimental data products. So now I'd like to turn the presentation over to James Burton. James will discuss upcoming work, key deliverables, and challenges.
Good afternoon, committee, and thank you for the introduction, Glenda. I will start by going over current upcoming work, discuss our current high-level timeline, and talk about some of the challenges we have identified. For current and upcoming work, we have a large task underway to assign standard variable names to the content we plan to collect and publish on our new annual integrated program. We will align variable names and concepts with the economic census and use newly standardized metadata throughout the program lifecycle. We're also working with Enterprise to align the new metadata with Enterprise Metadata Repository. To test our ability to collect requested data for the topics and proposed modules that Glenda mentioned with adequate quality and reasonable burden, we're planning both cognitive research and a follow-on pilot study, with the cognitive research and pilot plan this year and the pilot conducted in 2022. After the pilot, we will conduct briefings with respondents to gain a better understanding of their experiences and any challenge they may encounter when completing the survey. For our systems, we are looking across the capabilities of our current systems to determine best-in-class solutions to support and process integrated program content and methodology, while also looking at ways that the new technology development may either enhance or replace existing components. As of today, our opinion is that this processing system will include a combination of elements from the existing systems with enhancements, along with new concepts like a common data warehouse with company-level review capabilities and customizable visualizations.
Hi, James. It's Shauna Banks. Sorry to interrupt you. Can you make sure we're on the correct slide? We will need you to cue us to advance the slide.
You are not on the correct slide. You need to go back a slide, please. Yeah, I'll tell you when to go to the next slide, please.
Thank you so much.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, sir. All systems are go.
Okay. So the last bill on this slide should be for our business frame. We just completed the development of the prototype business frame that consolidates the separate processes currently used by the ACE component programs, includes any changes to the content needed for ACE, and aligns as closely as possible with the process used by the economic census. The prototype is currently under use and reviewed by our sampling team, and we plan to begin development of the production frame in October 21. Next slide, please. Our sampling team is researching how to design samples that support both the proposed national and geographic level publication goals. One of the challenges the team is addressing is how best to represent complex companies that operate across multiple states and industries. Also, for methodology, we are evaluating ways to align, modernize, and improve edit and imputation methodology and micro-macro review tools across the in-scope trades. Currently, our annual surveys operate independently, and these activities vary across our annual programs. Our publication team is working to develop the program's data products and release schedule. The new products will include a county-wide publication with data that crosses all trades, as well as industry-specific tables. For the release schedule, we are working both internally and with our data partners to determine the need and assess if it's best to release all the data products at the same time on a release or flow basis like the economic census. Next slide, please. These are some of our key deliverables for the program. To provide a general timeline, we plan to complete the cognitive testing in the first phase pilot survey in 22, finalize and provide instrument requirements by the end of October 22, begin usability testing on the new instruments in December of 2023, deliver the production sampling frame and samples by summer of 23, mail in early 24, and then begin releasing the new products in 25. Next slide, please. Some key challenges that we have discovered are the content needed at the national, industry, and geographic levels. We determine the best collection units enable us to collect the proposed content at the needed levels. With limited time and resources, and also knowing that we want to eventually move to modern system solutions and architecture, we're discussing how to best leverage our existing program platforms to have processes and systems in place to support production operations beginning in 24. With limited research staff and keeping an eye on respondent burden and fatigue and a definite need to test the proposed annual integrated program instrument, we're evaluating how to best plan and implement research to support our collection goals. In our current plan, at a minimum, we envision using enterprise solutions to support collection and dissemination operations. We have begun meeting with enterprise teams to ensure that their proposed solutions meet our program needs, while at the same time ensuring we can meet our proposed scheduled dates. Next slide, please. So these are the questions that we had asked for the committee to give us some help on. Given that we're planning to produce geographic estimates at the division, region, and state levels, if we're unable to get the data at the establishment level, what collection unit would you recommend? Do you have any recommendations regarding what should be tested in the annual integration economic survey pilot? What concerns do you have regarding integration of these programs or surveys? And with that, thank you very much, and I'll leave it for the committee to discuss. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much to both of our presenters, and I'd now like to introduce Lance Waller, the CSAC discussant.
Great, thank you very much. I'm unmuted and my slides are up. Good. Thanks. We can go to the next slide, please. I want to thank James and Belinda for that overview, and as you saw in their timeline, we're in the middle, getting past the middle towards the downhill slope of the integration. Now, the basic idea is very simple to state, but as they pointed out, there are a lot of details, and we appreciate the update and overview. The basic idea being connecting multiple economic surveys into an integrated sampling plan. So design this to happen together rather than the 6 different ones. And a metaphor I have whenever we're combining things that are challenging, if we could go to the next slide, please. At one extreme, I remember watching the Apollo-Soyuz mission and growing up, and when I wanted to be an astronaut and hadn't been convinced to be a statistician yet. And one of the tricky parts of this joint mission, and these, the backup ships are in the Air and Space Museum, is building this docking module, a highly technical connection between 2 sophisticated systems. And I think of this whenever we're trying to either combine surveys at the design phase or at the analysis phase, because on one end we could do this and find something very, very specific for an answer, or if we go to the next slide, we could find something that works pretty well most of the time. So we're all familiar with in international travel having to adjust to the outlets. These are 2 extremes, and there's a lot of work in the middle between the 2. So I thank you for the detail, in particular the detail organization of the stakeholder framework. So if we go to the next slide, please. The good elements that are in place, these are all, the stakeholder engagement plan, again, is an important idea. And as you can see, it organized the set of stakeholders, both internal and external, that have a lot riding on the combination. I'm wondering if there'll be any, it's an ongoing activity, so I'd encourage you to, think of deliverables of feedback, specific feedback you'd want from, and you can summarize after receiving from the stakeholders. The annual program requirements, you've got the draft in place, and that's well on the timeline. And it would be good in the years between now and the pilot to think about how this integrates with the stakeholder engagement plan, because the stakeholders will be the ones who will be using the outcome of this, and they will have their perspective, just like we've had in other discussions on the data user perspective. I like the record-keeping study you did. That was a very important idea. I think it gives you some nice background of, it probably provides good context for interpreting stakeholder and participant comments on this as well. For all 3, these are important benchmarking and steps along the way. My question is, are these similar ideas going to be incorporated as an ongoing kind of quality assessment, perhaps not in exactly the same format, but using these accomplishments here as benchmarks and seeing as things develop, I think would be really great. And if you did so, adding these to the deliverables might be a really good thing for reporting back to us, not only to the CSAC, but for the stakeholder groups and so on, that they could find this information in a consistent place and then see how it evolves over time. Next slide, please. Now, in the challenge list, and I thank you for clearly listing these, and the first was the choice of collection unit in the processing system. I think the CSAC can be helpful in discussions going forward, but we'll probably need a little more information on the criteria for the selection. From the six surveys coming together, perhaps some summary contrast of the current collection units and processing systems, so we can see where there's harmony and dissonance in these would be helpful. And then focusing the goal of the pilot, and I add an F in that you may want to consider, I mean, there's definitely an important role for a single pilot of the final system, but perhaps there's some smaller pilots or test runs or focus or initial examples that could be done for, say, comparing the processing system comparison on some subset component of this, maybe drawing from a couple of the integrated surveys. I think the list of modules is important, and we might want to expand what those roles are. Are those roles going to be data products are organized under modules, reports are organized under modules, and I could see pilots within each module perhaps focusing on the development over time. So one of the things the CSAC is discussing is thinking about how do you recommend the use of pilots, maybe plural, not multiple large pilots, but there may be some focused smaller ones that could provide input on some things to test. Next slide, please. And for the questions, like any good advisory committee, I'll answer your questions with other questions, but perhaps these are some things we can discuss in the committee discussion here. The first one about scale of data. Unable to get the data at establishment level for key items would state by industry be sufficient to meet most research needs. I think that stakeholder table, which is extensive, it may not be comprehensive, and we can't imagine every use case. That's something that's come up in other discussions today. But it would be important to identify what are the current surveys being used for by different stakeholders, and then see what would be left out should you not have establishment level information. And this, again, may be within modules. Some modules may need establishment level and other modules may not. And then recommendations regarding what should be tested in the pilot. Again, I kind of echo there may be some sub-pilots before this, and a role for a smaller pilot is you might be able to try different collection systems or components of collection systems to see how they may play out for one of the modules or a subset. And the processing system, we'll probably need a little more information about what's currently used with those as we think, and the integration with frames and some of the others. I think the other units, I'm sure those discussions are at some stage, but that would be an important component in here. And you want to stress test the pressure points as well as the things that seem to be working well, and that would probably be helpful in the pilot. And then the next slide, please. Any concerns on integration of the surveys? These surveys, as you showed a wide stakeholder community, both external and internal, and you may prioritize components of those, but I think one of the things to think of is loss of some key use cases. Now, we can't guess every possible use case, but the table of stakeholders and the results of your stakeholder engagement plan probably have some high priority uses of this element that you want to maintain. And that by identifying those high priority ones that may need to change, that's where you can start planning with the stakeholders the possible adjustments. of what might be done. And then I don't know if there's potential for supplements, targeted surveys that hang off of off the eyes, or things that could address some establishment level use cases in some sort of connection to eyes, but maybe not in the whole eyes. Just something to think about. The other surveys that will still exist, some of those, Pulse and some of the others may be able to provide some things that the others had before, or in combination with eyes or combination with administrative data. So I think there's some cooperative discussion with the stakeholder community that might help answer this question in terms of mitigating concerns and planning for the future use. And then I believe this is the last one, but given that they're planning to produce geographic estimates at the division, region, and state level, if we're unable to get things at the establishment level, what collection unit would we recommend? Again, I think the prioritization of use cases from your stakeholder community could provide guidelines for this, because we want to identify what use cases would be impacted by the loss of the establishment level. And I understand there is the sort of geographic challenge. If you get two resolved in small areas, particular establishments may not show up, and then you have lots and lots and lots of zeros, and even though you have more resolution, maybe you don't have much more information. I think these use case prioritization or primary use case prioritization sort of discussions could be really beneficial in getting from 2021 into 22, 23, 24 implementation. And I think next slide, I don't think there's another one, but nope. Yeah, so thanks again for the clear presentation and the updated progress. This is a very challenging, but I think the benefits are pretty clear in terms of what's going to happen, but there's a lot between now and then. You've already had a lot since the initial Academy's report to now, and I really applaud the progress that's been made, and hope these ideas and comments and discussion from the committee will be helpful in planning out the completion. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much, Lance. I'd first like to give Linda and James the opportunity to respond to any of those comments or suggestions.
Sure. I think I'll start, and then I'll give Belinda a couple of them that maybe she would like to talk to. I first wanted to thank Lance. I really appreciate his feedback. I think especially the feedback on maybe ways to expand our pilot plans to target specific different things that we have questions on, as well as maybe looking at different ways where we might want to develop the program to have these targeted supplements. I mean, we've talked about that a little, but we really haven't put in place any concrete plans. In terms of some of the questions, I just wanted to clarify a little bit about what our sort of units question was about, to maybe help the committee and maybe help us or respond to that more clearly. Is that our real issue that we're coming across is that, we have an economic census that we conduct every 5 years that targets establishments. And then in the intermediate period, there are the annual programs that usually are collecting data more at a company or at an industry level. And so our concern is that as we try to expand the collect geographic level of data in the intervening years with the economic census, about perhaps the burden that we'll put on the respondents by, drilling down to the establishment level in some cases, or some of these additional items to try to put us at some of these geographic levels. So I think that's what our question was about, and that's our struggle that we're sort of getting at. And I'll stop with that one in case there's any feedback, and I'll talk about a couple more. Does that help you, Lance, better understand the question?
Oh, yeah, thanks. Sorry, I muted myself and then started talking. That's a very helpful clarification. The burden on the respondents is a very real concern, as you know, and getting some information on that does provide some additional clarity for our discussions in the CSAC. We'll give that some more thought. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. And then I wanted to go and talk about what our current pilot plan is, and so that you can better understand what we're currently planning with our phased pilot approach. And maybe from that, think about how you would ask us the questions, right, and how that might, what you would think about then how we would change or modify that to sort of, try to get at what you're envisioning there. So why don't you go ahead, Glenda?
Thank you, James. So yes, so we are looking at conducting the pilot. The pilot will be for survey year 2021. We plan to mail the first phase of the pilot out sometime in January. We are looking at a phased approach. Right now, we are still determining what types of cases we are going to use. At this point, we believe that we will be using a combination of production and non-production cases for the pilot. We will be using Qualtrics as the collection instrument for the pilot, although since we will use Centurion for the collection instrument once the survey is in the field. But Qualtrics will be the tool that we use for the pilot. The first phase that we're looking at for the pilot will be production cases that are good responders and generally report early to our surveys. We are limiting the number of cases to 100 because we don't want to negatively impact our existing annual surveys that will be out in the field. The next phase of the pilot, we are looking at production cases that do not typically report to our surveys. We can use a little larger group of these because we're not losing anything. They already don't report to our surveys, so if we can convert them or we can find out maybe why they're not reporting, then that, we can collect some information and cast a wider net to get some results back from our pilot. And then we're looking at non-production cases that are not currently in any of our annual surveys. This is, again, just so we can cast this wider net and get more information and research back.
Great, thanks. That's very helpful.
So in terms of the stakeholder planning, Lance, one thing that we didn't bring up on the slide deck that we're currently doing is that we're having a bit of a roadshow where we're going to the different stakeholder agencies and sort of making sure that they're clear about what our plans are as we evolve and develop this program. And we plan to go, to the stakeholders at multiple intervals to give them updates on where we're at. Now, I think what we want to make sure is that we haven't missed any important or critical stakeholder or group that we may need to have outreach to and discuss with, as well as maybe what those stakeholder communities might like to hear from us.
Thanks. That's really good information. I had kind of assumed that was happening, but I'm glad to get the clarity on it. I really thought the stakeholder slide, well, it's a lot of information. It's well organized. So I really, it's a tip of the hat to the amount of work that goes into putting that kind of information together, and appreciate the outreach. I think that's a very helpful investment of time and effort for the ultimate success of the program.
Thank you for that feedback. And, like you mentioned in your slide, the stakeholder engagement plan it's an evolving document. We're adding to this document on a continuous basis. As we meet with our stakeholders, we link to the feedback that we're getting from the stakeholders and notes and comments from, these discussions that we're having. So.
Yeah, and I think that's time well spent, not only for all of you, but for your respondent community, as you just stated. It's a relationship that will pay off over time. So thanks.
All right, so this is Jay Bright again. I'm open it up to general CSAC discussion. So anyone who cares to make a question or comment, please raise your hand. And while we're waiting on that, I might just ask, one of the possible concerns that Lance raised was not just loss of use cases, but just changes. So just the time series aspect, some of these data products will have a little hiccup, and part of the engagement needs to be, educating users. What does this mean? What it might look like, and how to understand that change that's mostly methodological.
No, we definitely appreciate that. We're going to have a special working group that's going to focus on the time series issues because we understand that not only there's the outside stakeholders, but we have internal stakeholders like our indicator programs that depend on the consistency of the annual time series for their benchmarking operations as well. So that's something we really have to be careful about. Thank you.
Any other comments or discussion from CSAC members? I'm looking for hands up. So, Tommy, hang on. One last pass. Any last call for comments? If not, I will hand it back over to Tommy Wright.
Thank you, Jay. And thank you, Belinda and James and Lance Waller. I noticed that the Census Bureau presenters, I hope they're still with us, but maybe they're gone, but they managed to get through this presentation without mentioning the word Odyssey. But that's an older name for this effort, but I think the new name is very well suited. We are integrating 6 surveys. But thank you very much. And thanks to the committee members who had some limited discussion as well. But thank you very much. It is now 1:41, and we are scheduled for public comment at 1:45. I think we can start a little early. Is that correct, Shauna? I want to confirm that with you.
Hi, Tommy. Yes, it's Shauna Banks. You can start early.
Okay. All right. So it is now time for public comment. During this virtual meeting, we take public comments verbally. This is a change from the past. Operator, will you please open lines for public comment? While that is taking place, comments are limited to 2 minutes. Anything over that may be submitted in writing. For the record, when submitting your comment verbally, please state your name and affiliation with your comment. We have received one this morning.
Tommy, this is Shauna.
Yes, Shauna.
Sorry to interrupt you. Let's give Christina a moment to give instructions on offering public comment.
Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and read the 2 that I have. Is that fine?
Not just yet. She's going to give them verbally.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you would like to make a public comment at this time, please press *1 on your phone, unmute your line, and record your name and organization, as it will be needed to introduce you. To withdraw your comment at any time, please press *2. Again, to make a public comment, please press *1. Thank you so much.
Tommy, over to you to read public comment.
Thank you very much. So we received 2 written public comments, which are now posted on the committee website, meeting at census.gov. The Federal Register notice located on the committee's website provides more information for submitting written comments. I'm going to read through these and try to stay within the limits of 2 minutes each. The first one, public comment by Adeline Wilcox. I think this has been referenced earlier by Mario, but it's somewhat brief. Although I already knew differential privacy and other new disclosure avoidance methods will diminish the utility of Decennial Census and American Community Survey data, not until I read a Louisiana State University environmental health report did I realize how destructive differential privacy will be. As we have seen, 2020 Census Disclosure Avoidance System processing scrambled data, producing untrue counts at the lowest levels of census geography. Investigators performed a mosquito vector proliferation study using census blocks as the analytical unit. This references a study, and I want to point out that the date of the study is February the 3rd, 2021, and that is before the Census Bureau's final version, production version of the top-down algorithm. The Louisiana State University researchers summarized 2010 census population at the census block level. At the census block level, the environmental science and public health researchers tabled what they called 2017 American Community Survey median household income. I expect this Baton Rouge, Louisiana mosquito vector production study will be repeated to evaluate mosquito abatement and blight reduction efforts. Perhaps researchers will also want to look at census tenure data, but differential privacy will diminish the utility of census block and census block group counts and estimates, making confident longitudinal analysis of census and American Community Survey data more difficult or impossible. That's the end of that first comment. The second comment that I have received is from, Deborah Stein, of the Network Director of the Partnership for America's Children, to the Census Scientific Advisory Committee meeting. My name is Debbie Stein. I am commenting on behalf of the Partnership for America's Children. We helped lead the Count All Kids Coalition, which worked to improve the count of young children in the 2020 decennial census. The partnership has the following concerns we would like to share with the CSAC and the Census Bureau. So I'm going to read each point, but I'm not going to read the rest of the details in each paragraph. These are posted at the committee's website. First, we thank the Bureau for accepting the March 2021 CSAC recommendations to establish a task force that will focus on data for young children across varied Census Bureau programs. The second paragraph. Second, we strongly encourage the Bureau to develop more robust evaluations of the 2020 efforts to improve the count of young children. Third, this is the third paragraph. We ask the Census Bureau to quickly update all the studies they did between 2016 and 2019 on the undercount of young children. The fourth paragraph begins with, fourth, we ask the Bureau to assess the effectiveness of administrative data in counting young children. The fifth paragraph. Fifth, given the significant undercount of young children, we urge that the child advocacy community be included in the list of stakeholders to be consulted on the Demographic and Housing Characteristics File, DHC, and Detailed Demographic and Housing Characteristics File, DDHS. The last paragraph. Finally, we commend the Bureau's decision to share its progress on the Blended Base Population Estimates Program, and we encourage the Bureau to reach out to a wide range of experts and stakeholders, including the children's community, through such options as open invite webinars to get their input. That's the end of that letter. So I omitted the details for each of those points due to time. Are there persons online, operator?
Yes, there are. And just a reminder, you may still press *1 to make a public comment at this time. Our first comment comes from Deborah Stein with the Department for America's Children. Go ahead, please. Your line is open.
Actually, you just read my comments, so I'm going to withdraw myself. But thank you, and I hope people will take a look at the explanation of each of them.
Yes, I thought that might happen, and thank you very much.
And speakers, I am showing no further comments at this time.
Are there any additional comments from the public? Anyone?
Christina, this is Sean. No additional comments?
I'm still showing no comments at this time, but I will leave the queue open.
Tommy and Shauna will wait just a moment.
All right.
Christina, just to confirm, no additional?
I can confirm no additional comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tommy, you can close the public comment period.
Yes, thank you. This closes the public comment period, And as we did yesterday, committee members and Jay, we're scheduled for a break. And following that break, and Jay, you might want to comment exactly when you want members to reconvene, but we're going to have a break. And for the rest of us, we will suspend the meeting at this point until 4:30 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., the CSAC committee discussion and formulation we will hear at that particular time. Jay, do you want to provide? By the way, I should also say that the WebEx platform and conference bridge will remain open. Jay, what do you want?
So we were scheduled to end public comment at what time? So we're just a bit ahead, right? So
we're a bit ahead.
Yeah, and we were scheduled for how long of a break prior to this? Sorry.
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Okay. So CSAC members, could we take a 15-minute break prior to reconvening in our breakout rooms?
That's 2:05, Jay?
Yes. So, and then Tommy, we just sign out of this and then reconvene to the same platform at...
We'll see you at 4:30, yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everyone.
Welcome back, everyone. I would now like to hand the call back to your host, Tommy Wright. Thank you. You may begin.
Thank you very much, and welcome back, everyone, to the 2021 CSAC Fall Virtual Meeting. My name is Tommy Wright. Just a reminder, information for closed captioning services can be found on the committee's website. Now we'll turn it over to Jay and members of the committee who will present the recommendations. Jay?
Thanks, Tommy. Can you confirm that you can see my screen?
I can.
Great.
I can.
Sorry, that's a yes, right?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right. So thank you, everyone. And first, thanks to the Bureau for all your work in preparing for this meeting. The advisory staff were particularly helpful in making sure that we got our presentation materials well in advance. The presentations were detailed, the presenters were well prepared, kept to our allotted time, had useful discussion, and the technology allowed us to have this discussion in an accessible public forum. So thanks to everyone for their efforts in making this meeting a success. We wanted to create two requests that are sort of our standard requests, one of which is that presenters actually ask questions of us. So having actual questions as part of the slide deck is extremely helpful, and also ensuring that the slides have sufficient information that we can usefully address those questions. And for the most part, these presentations met those criteria. We just want to reiterate those regularly. Responsiveness of the Bureau to our previous recommendations of various types. And we've got a fairly lengthy set of recommendations broken down by topic. So I'll just launch in. The first has to do with the 2020 Census Operational Quality Metrics. And the justification is in here, but one of the questions that comes up again and again, as we've mentioned before, have to do with students who live in university dorms. This was a huge issue in group quarters counts in this particular census. And you can read the details here at your leisure, but we all know there were problems with how to deal with these students who were sent home during the pandemic. So recommendation 1.1 has to do with the recommendation that the Bureau publish a post-census evaluation report on the participation of students who live in university dorms or off-campus housing. This follows up on an earlier recommendation. We'd asked for a one-way briefing on what's up with this particular group quarters question, and this is asking for a specific report. We are always interested in hard-to-count populations, and one of our recommendations here is CSAC recommends the Bureau publish operational quality metrics for hard-to-count subpopulations in each state, including the unhoused population, young children, and others. And tied to that is recommendation 1.3. CSAC recommends the Bureau publish operational quality metrics on the item non-response rates by type of group quarter and by key demographic groups, including race and Hispanic origin. We commend the Bureau for its engagement with outside external experts, and we hope that that could be codified and an expected part of 2030, well in advance of 2030. So 1.4, CSAC recommends that the Bureau charter and convene independent external review teams for the 2030 decennial census and ensure that these teams have adequate access to background materials and data systems ahead of time, as opposed to kind of getting those going on the fly in some cases in 2020. We had a bit of discussion around the topic of how the pandemic had impacted different quality metrics and how to disentangle that from what would have changed anyway. So we are asking that the Bureau take the lead on researching and documenting every aspect of how 2020 census operations were impacted. And one of the mechanisms by which you might do that includes statistical modeling using 2019 ACS data collection as a pre-pandemic benchmark. So 1.5, CSAC recommends that the Bureau publish a post-census evaluation research report on the many ways the COVID-19 pandemic affected 2020 census operations. We encourage assessment of efforts in 2020 to improve the count of young children. And I think this is just a comment, sorry. So 1.6, the recommendation, CSAC recommends that the Bureau prioritize the timely update of assessments of the undercount of young children during the 2020 census so that they may be available to support 2030 census planning. Going to the second presentation, which had to do with recent challenges to data collection, and we had 3 different presentations on that particular topic with John Chika as discussant. So we were extremely interested in various methodological adaptations that the Bureau was able to adapt on the fly to for many of their surveys because data collections were adversely affected by the pandemic. So we heard different aspects of that from CPS, from the American Community Survey, and from some economic surveys. We had some very interesting reports there and some novel weighting methodologies. We make some reference to the survey literature here. But the first of the specific recommendations, 2.1, is CSAC recommends that the Bureau make the experimental weights available to researchers outside the Bureau, preferably as public use files, but at least to the FSRDCs. And recall that those weights were developed as a mechanism to mitigate some non-response bias. And non-response bias is one aspect, so we have different non-response rates, and we can see some how the non-response bias can affect levels, but we're also interested in just the overall effect on data quality of non-response. So a recommendation 2.2, CSAC recommends that the Bureau compare survey income reports to amounts obtained from linked administrative records in order to assess response quality. The next bit of text here has to do with the experimental estimates being released from ACS. So CSAC is particularly interested in the evidence underlying the decision to withhold release of the traditionally weighted ACS and to release these experimental estimates instead. And we do note that an analytic report and working paper are scheduled for release in the coming months, leading to our recommendation 2.3. CSAC recommends that the analytic report and working paper include the evidence on which these decisions to withhold releases of traditionally weighted ACS data and to release experimental estimates instead were based. We were particularly interested in how these alternative estimates will address differential response by calendar month. And this leads to recommendation 2.4. CSAC recommends that the Bureau include in its analytic report a discussion of how response differentials by month were addressed with the experimental weights and demonstrate that these methods produced satisfactory results for characteristics with significant seasonal variation or varying annual reference periods. And 2.5, because ACS estimates of migration, both internal migration and as well as from abroad, have come to play a critical role in population estimates, CSAC recommends that the efficacy of the experimental weighting methods with respect to estimates of migration be highlighted in this documentation that we're expecting. We thought about this idea of the 5-year estimates and how to fold in 1-year estimates, whether the traditional weighting or the experimental weighting, and we recommend in 2.6 that the Bureau present empirical evidence in support of its plans for the 5-year data products including an evaluation of alternative approaches. The summary should address implications for all levels of geography. Let's see. Going on to the economic surveys, one of the topics that came up is the nature of the data collection and maybe a survey about a survey. 2.7 recommendation, CSAC recommends that the Bureau explore the prospect of using the Small Business Pulse Survey or a similar vehicle to collect information on the limitations that small businesses may face in providing business or economic data electronically. Turning to the FRAMES program, and I should be saying on each of these that these were extremely well put together presentations with lots of detail and really interesting topics. The FRAMES program in particular, the CSAC members have expressed considerable excitement about it. And scrolling down to specific recommendations, the first of these is that CSAC recommends that the Bureau investigate the impact of the data linkages gained from the FRAMES program, which may rely more heavily on administrative records, on traditional hard-to-count subpopulations. The idea being that hard-to-count subpopulations may have different behavior under an administrative records framework than they would under other data collection mechanisms. One of the notes here is that the use of administrative records alters the traditional balance of agency in the sense that if you go and ask someone for their data and they give it to you, they have agency in giving it to you. But if you instead extract that from administrative records, they've surrendered some of that agency. Leading to the recommendation, CSAC encourages the Bureau to investigate the public's awareness of the Bureau's reliance on administrative records and any potential implications of this reliance on the public's willingness to engage with the Bureau's traditional methods of data collection. CSAC recommends that these investigations be included in the currently planned mixed methods assessment of the FRAMES program. Another idea that we sort of wrestled with a bit has to do with the issue of privacy and what data might be considered more private that might be considered administrative record, whether it's public or private. And in 3.3, we note CSAC applauds the Bureau's development of mixed methods assessments that will gauge the level of public comfort with the Bureau's reliance on administrative records to create the demographic frame as implied by the FRAMES program. CSAC recommends that this effort specifically assess how the public's comfort varies between governmental and non-governmental data sources. CSAC notes that the results of these assessments could inform a strategy for communicating the parameters of the FRAMES program and the privacy safeguards in place. So the next recommendation has to do with how do you resolve or reconcile conflicting data. So this is 3.4. CSAC recommends that the Bureau explicate the methodology for resolving or reconciling conflicting data existing in different frames. We next turn to young children again, 3.5. CSAC recommends that the Bureau evaluate the impact of the FRAMES program on the accuracy of data about young children, noting that there are some FRAMES type administrative records that might be quite helpful in counting young children and others that would not at all. Next is a more technical recommendation having to do with data, how to reference data. So this is 3.6. CSAC recommends that the FRAMES team explore reference and citation standardization when referring to extracted data products. And 3.7 it has to do with the question that was asked of us for the FRAMES program, which we felt we weren't really in a position to answer. So the question was a quite technical one about what we might recommend regarding the infrastructure that links the frames in their current locations, or keep them separate, or consider some combination of approaches. And we weren't really in a position to answer that question with the information we had at hand. We'd like to know more about it, and we recommend that the frames team deliver a presentation to CSAC at which the perceived costs and benefits of the varying approaches to the design and architecture of the linkage infrastructure could be assessed and discussed. Section 4, the status update on the census data products and stakeholder engagement plans, had a lot to do with differential privacy protections for the DHC and the detailed DHC. And this is a big area. We have a number of recommendations. The first of these is that CSAC recommends that in the process of evaluating Census 2020, the the Bureau produce a post-evaluation report critically reflecting on the successes and failures in implementing differential privacy thus far, including how these lessons can be used to inform future applications of differential privacy and the relationship between the top-down algorithm and the redistricting data file and DP application and the DHC file. So there's a lot going on here in real time, major data products yet to be released with differential privacy protections, and a lot to be learned. Turning to redistricting data specifically, so 4.2, CSAC recommends that the Bureau release guidance for users of redistricting data on interpreting differentially private data for various uses. The Bureau should also release guidance on when and how to aggregate to larger geographies to increase accuracy. This guidance should come as soon as possible. And the idea here is that we need some guidance around data accuracy expectations based on geographic level and subpopulation sizes. So how small is small, for what variables, for what uses, and how do you report back on that uncertainty in a principled way. We commend the Bureau's continued efforts to engage key stakeholders through a number of different processes. And we do note that there's a lot to be done yet that will also require stakeholder engagement. And this is, again, a huge and complicated problem, but one of the recommendations in 4.3, CSAC recommends that the Bureau make demonstration data available in formats that are easily digestible in tables for each of the production tables planned. Further, CSAC recommends that the Bureau make public announcements in advance of the demonstration data release so that analysts can plan ahead to devote the time to evaluate data and engage. CSAC suggests the Bureau set an engagement time period longer than 30 days at a minimum of 45 days. If demonstration data are released in microdata format, users will need even more evaluation time. So this is a major demand, even if it's a computational demand on data users to try to ingest and make sense of these demonstration data products. In recommendation 4.4, as the Bureau continues to engage with stakeholders, CSAC recommends adding to the stakeholder engagement list data clearinghouses, specifically, like IPUMS and Social Explorer and others, as well as representatives of child advocacy groups and other hard-to-count and historically excluded groups. The next recommendation also has to do with stakeholder engagement. And one of the things we found is that there's this process of kind of reaching out to the user community and saying, give us your use cases. And we have a pretty strong feeling that the Census Bureau should have a strong understanding in-house of these many use cases. So we specifically recommend that the Bureau develop and staff an office with responsibility and adequate resources for maintaining a database of all known data use cases and for engaging with data stakeholders when changes to data products are considered. Data use cases would include, but not be limited to, government agency research, government policy and funding formulas, legal mandates and regulations, community planning, business planning, and academic research, for example. So actually make that an office with that responsibility. We talked a bit about the different kinds of geographies at which the differentially private data might be released, and because one of the issues is maybe the data would be released at larger geographies. So we wanted to consider some alternative geographies. There's some discussion here specifically about gridded data products, which is something that the Census in Japan has implemented, which seems like a pretty interesting alternative. And we also wanted to specifically recommend in 4.6, as the Bureau determines the geographic scale at which to release DHC data, CSAC recommends that the Bureau prioritize political units, such as places, minor civil divisions, and also prioritize tracts. Minor civil divisions could be geographically larger than tracts in rural areas, and these are political units that require data for decision-making and funding. So one of the questions that we thought quite a bit about had to do with the production of underlying microdata for producing the tables. And in 4.7, we recommend that the Bureau continue to evaluate positive and negative implications of not producing microdata that underlies DHC tables in collaboration with stakeholders. Unless there are compelling use cases, extreme data inconsistencies between tables, or other critical negative consequences, CSAC recommends the Bureau does not produce differentially private 100% microdata as the underlying basis for DHC tables. And in 4.8, because tables protected with differential privacy are not necessarily internally consistent in the sense of adding up, CSAC recommends that the Bureau develop a consistency metric to be included in the DHC demonstration data to measure the amount of departure from internal consistency. In 4.9, CSAC recommends the Bureau devise a plan for how they can make sample microdata available to users through a PUMS file and how they can make 100% microdata available through the FSRDCs. The Bureau should also save some of the privacy loss budget for special tabulations that may need to be created and published at a later date. In 4.10, CSAC recommends that in making decisions about applying DP to the DHC file, the Bureau consider that many users will be looking to make comparisons over time. Decisions should be made with that in mind. The next recommendation it follows up on an earlier recommendation we had made about releasing noisy counts prior to post-processing, so differentially private counts prior to post-processing. And there are some different possible alternatives, and we understand some of the technical limitations there, but we recommend that the Bureau publish unbiased estimates corresponding to the 3.4 billion statistics released in the PL 94-171 tables, along with information about the covariances of the noise generation process as a reasonable compromise among the different possible noisy data products that might be released. Turning to count question resolution, this was something that was in flux right up until a couple of days before the presentation. The slides changed in real time. So we didn't have specific recommendations here, but just noted that we commend the Bureau for this development of the CQR process and for the inclusion of group quarters in scope, though that may have been scaled back a bit by this recent legal decision. So we are very interested in the possible future avenues that might get around this to allow for addressing group quarters questions, and we just made some comments there without a specific recommendation, barring further information. But we'd like to hear more about that in the future. Turning to Section 6, the Annual Integrated Economic Survey, following up on that Committee on National Statistics review that led to this development of the Annual Integrated Economic Survey, or EIS. We're very interested in this entire process and have a few recommendations here. 6.1, CSAC recommends ongoing annual updates to both the Stakeholder Engagement Plan and the annual program requirements in the years leading up to the 2024 EIS implementation. CSAC further recommends defining a schedule for review and updating of both on a regular basis following EIS implementation. And then 6.2, mindful of time, CSAC recommends that the Bureau clearly define the criteria for selection driving the final choice of collection unit and processing system with input from representatives from both the internal and external stakeholder communities defined in the engagement plan. And noted in the comments here that we were very impressed with the stakeholder engagement plan. So we also talked a bit about the pilot survey planning, and 6.3 is a specific recommendation that the Bureau use small, focused pilot assessments of potential processing systems to provide insight on modes of comparison and insight on the choice of collection unit, that being small pilot surveys as opposed to the larger pilot survey, focused pilot surveys on smaller components of the overall problem. And then 6.4, CSAC recommends that the Bureau query stakeholders to identify use cases that would be impacted by limiting EIS data to the state by industry level. And that's because there was a question to us from the EIS group about what would be an appropriate level if they couldn't get it at the establishment level, and we kind of turned that around, put it back on the EIS group. And that was our set of recommendations for fall 2021, and I would like to call on the CSAC members for a vote. So I think that I can stop sharing here and see, hang on, and see the CSAC membership listed. And I'd just like to call for a vote. And if so, all in favor, could you signify by, all in favor of approving the recommendations for fall 21, would you please signify by raising your hand in the little icon over there, you know? So Rochelle, I see you raise, oh, there it is. And Lester, are you present? Oh, there's yours. Okay. And Jessica, are you there? So any opposed? All right, so I don't see Jessica's hand. I'm not sure if she can hear. But otherwise, we have passed those recommendations with no dissent. So I think at that point I can turn that back over to Tommy.
All right. Thank you very much, Jay, and committee members. I have a few things to say. Number one, this concludes the 2021 fall virtual meeting, proceedings for day 2 and for the entire meeting. Your comprehensive comments, perspectives, and recommendations are vital to our efforts and very much appreciated. I want to sincerely thank you. Words seem inadequate. Jay, this is quite remarkable presentation from you and the committee members, and a special sincere thanks because you're giving your time and your expertise, and these things it's hard to set a price on them, and you're doing it for free. You're doing it for free. I want to emphasize this. This is really significant and very much appreciated, and I'm just going to simply say thank you very much. I want to also express thanks to members from the Census Bureau and members of the team, the technical team, as we did earlier. Please note that the next meeting is tentatively scheduled for March 17th and 18th, 2022. Unless there's anything else, this concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tommy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
That will conclude today's conference, and we thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.